Chapter 139. The cultivators of Mengshua Hall naturally wouldn't let her sit there for 4 hours. After the cultivator who received Tiange reported to the manager of Mengshua Hall, an early-stage foundation-building cultivator, learned that it was Patriarch Jinghe's idea. So he came to pay a visit and gave Tiange all the tasks she needed to do at Mengshua Hall. After reading the contents of the jade slip, Tiange realized the cultivator who received her was right. These new disciples all had special teachers to teach them, so they didn't need to do anything. Besides, it wasn't convenient for her to do other chores. After a while, Tiange looked up at the manager of Mengshua Hall and said, "That being the case, how about I help teach them their homework?" New disciples had to start teaching Taoist scriptures, and teaching Taoist scriptures had to start from learning how to read. Since the distant past era, many characters have been left behind. Cultivation techniques and treasures from different eras might use different characters. Disciples who had just come into contact with cultivation had to spend a lot of time learning how to read every day. The manager naturally didn't have any objections. After repeatedly agreeing, he informed the supervising disciple that Tiange only needed to follow the supervising disciple to teach her homework. Tiange sighed inwardly when she saw the various teaching methods of Mengshua Hall. When she embarked on the path of cultivation, all she knew was a cultivation technique. When she was in family's village, even the old master didn't know that knowledge, so she could only explore it bit by bit. Later she found second uncle, and was taught by him personally. But how could uncle and niece take care of everything when they were wandering? Second uncle wasn't a teacher. Most of what she knew and learned were things she encountered on her own, and second uncle only remembered to teach her. In Enchanting school, each subject was clearly separated and taught by different cultivators. If she could do this back then, she wouldn't have had such a hard time. Nevertheless, she was just sighing. She was already very lucky to be able to reach this point. With second uncle's guidance, she was much better than individual cultivators who struggled to survive. After being led into the hall by the supervising cultivator, Tiange saw that the prayer mats in the room were full of children between 6 and 17 years old. Their cultivation levels were between the first and third layer of the aura refining realm. When they saw her walking in, their gazes all fell on her. She didn't conceal her aura. In front of these early-stage aura refining disciples, the aura of a foundation-building cultivator was naturally very powerful. The steward coughed, and the children immediately stood up and respectfully saluted him. Disciple greets teacher. Although the steward was in the same realm as them, he was in charge of teaching them, so they addressed him as teacher. The steward led Tiange to the center and said, "Disciples, this is Grandmaster Mo, the disciple of Patriarch Jinghe of Clear Spring Peak." Grandmaster Mo's talents were outstanding. She wasn't even 30 yet, but her cultivation level was already in the middle stage of the foundation-building realm. Patriarch Jinghe specially ordered Grandmaster Mo to come to Mengshua Hall. "From today onward, Grandmaster Mo will teach all of you together with me. I hope you'll seize this opportunity and cultivate diligently with Grandmaster Mo as your example." Tiange saw that these children's eyes were filled with amazement and admiration. For them, nascent soul cultivators were like immortals. Furthermore, when they saw that Tiange looked like she was in her 20s, yet she already had this kind of cultivation level, they were even more amazed. Under their attentive gazes, Tiange recalled the first time she met Yi Jingguan. She was also amazed and thought how great it would be if she had this kind of power. She never expected that she would also become the object of admiration for these young disciples, who had just entered the path of immortality. "All right, all of you can sit down. Today, we'll continue to study the Nanhua Heart Sutra." This mental cultivation technique is Enchanting School's basic mental cultivation technique, so it can't be underestimated. If there's anything wrong, please correct me, Grandmaster Mo. The steward bowed towards Tiange, then invited her to sit on the praying mat in front of him. "Last time, it was mentioned that it's not the other who has no self, it's not me who has no gain. It's near, but I don't know why. Do you all know what it means?" A boy about 10 years old immediately raised his hand. The steward nodded with a smile. He was just worried that these children wouldn't dare to answer in front of Grandmaster Mo. But now that someone stood up, he felt relieved. The child stood up and looked at Mo Tienga before he answered. It's not the other who has no self, it's not me who has no gain. This sentence means that without the other, there's no me, and without me there's no the other. For example, if there's no good, there's no bad, and if there's no bad, there's no good. Two opposite things often need each other to present themselves. And very good. The steward asked again. Then do you understand the meaning of the second sentence? It's near, but it's near, which means that it's close to the root of things. I don't know why, which means that I don't know whether there's something pushing behind the scenes. This explanation makes sense. The steward nodded and looked at Mo Tienga. Seeing that she didn't have any intention to speak, he continued to say, if this sentence is used on the path of cultivation, it's neither good nor evil. Everything's at its source. Our Tao school pursues the way of the celestial being. The so-called Tao is like the laws of heaven and earth. There's a law in the dark. Therefore, although we don't insist on doing good, we can't act recklessly. After listening to the steward's explanation, the child bowed his head and said, yes, disciple will earnestly comprehend it. Good, continue. Things are nothing but that. Things are nothing but this. If you see that, you don't see it. If you know it, you know it. This steward was in the 8th layer of the aura refining realm. Judging from his age, he should be in his 40s. So it naturally wouldn't be a problem for him to explain this basic mental cultivation technique. Mo Tienga also didn't interrupt, and just listened silently. It could be seen that the boy who answered at the beginning was quite outstanding when it came to Taoist scriptures. 70 to 80% of the questions asked by the steward were answered by him. However, Mo Tienga also discovered that the others seemed to be very unfriendly towards him. Whenever he answered a question, several people would secretly make faces at him. A slight frown appeared on Mo Tienga's face. Could it be that there were also cases of bullying and humiliation in this school? 4 hours passed very quickly. Mo Tienga discovered that this errand actually passed time very quickly. She only needed to answer some questions the steward found hard to answer. For her, aura refining realm questions were very simple, so she didn't need to think too much about it. She even had to thank Luo Fengxue for thinking of a good solution for her. After she finished her time at Mengxue Hall, Mo Tienga returned to Shangqing Palace. Once she finished her errands for the day, she went to report to Lord Taoist Jinghe. Master, Lord Taoist Jinghe, who was peeling grapes with his spiritual power, only looked at her. Oh, you're back. Mo Tienga criticized him inwardly. This is a nascent soul cultivator who has nothing better to do, peeling grapes all day long. Nevertheless, she still looked well-behaved on the surface. Yes, master. I finished my errands for today. Finished. Lord Taoist Jinghe propped himself up and sat up. He said to her with great interest, tell me about it. Mo Tienga braced herself and said, the steward's hall arranged for me to go to Mengxue Hall, so I went. I mainly had to answer some questions from new disciples. Mengxue Hall? Lord Taoist Jinghe nodded carelessly. It was arranged by that girl Fengxue, wasn't it? Yes. I thought so. Aside from that girl, who else would think of letting you go to Mengxue Hall? That's for the best. New disciples will leave Mengxue Hall sooner or later, and at that time. Mo Tienga pricked up her ears. Could it be that there's a purpose to this arrangement? Unfortunately, Lord Taoist Jinghe didn't say anything more. He once again glared at her and said, why are you standing there in a daze? Quickly go and cultivate. Yes. Mo Tienga swallowed her words sullenly. I don't need to think too highly of this master. He's just torturing me. From then on, Mo Tienga repeated these days. Collecting heavenly dew, taking care of spiritual plants, tidying up the beast yard, going to Mengxue Hall, and cultivating. Day after day, she became familiar with all the affairs in Shangqing Palace. Because she stayed in Mengxue Hall for a long time, she also became familiar with the affairs in Clear Spring Peak. Because of this, she somewhat understood why Lord Taoist Jinghe arranged these things for her to do. She had been in Xianqing School for 7 years, but 2 of them were in the foundation building realm, and 2 of them were missing. In the remaining 3 years, She was in closed-door meditation all day and didn't integrate into the school at all. Now, she took care of Shangqing Palace's affairs every day and came into contact with cultivators in Mengxua Hall. She gradually became familiar with Clear Spring Peak and slowly became a real disciple of Xianqing School. Now that she understood all this, her feelings towards Lord Taoist Jinghe were complicated. This master almost never gave her pointers and didn't give her medicinal pills or treasures. Instead, he used this kind of method to correct her cultivation path. She was now 27 years old, but she was already in the middle stage of the foundation building realm. What she lacked wasn't medicinal pills or treasures, but the growth of her mental state. In particular, from the early stage to the middle stage of the foundation building realm, she didn't experience any hardships and didn't have enough mental experience. With such an unstable cultivation level, it was easy to breed inner demons. Inner demons were the most terrifying hurdle on the road to the core formation realm and the nascent soul realm. Although he didn't say it explicitly, this cheap master actually had great expectations for her. Under a tree in Mengxua Hall, a 10-year-old boy was reading Taoist scriptures diligently. As the Tao, don't bother with the formula and keep the truth. All the joints in the Naiwen have the spirit. The spirit of the hair is blue, the word Taiyuan. The spirit of the brain, the word Naiwen. The spirit of the eyes, the word Yingxian. The spirit of the nose, the word Yulong. The word Lingjian. The spirit of the ears, the word Yingtian. The word divine ability, the word life, the word Jingluan. His cultivation level was only in the first layer of the aura refining realm. He was only the most ordinary new disciple in Xianqing School, and was still studying Taoist scriptures. But his hard work was also obvious to all. Apart from the daily morning classes, he spent the rest of his time reading Taoist scriptures. He had only been in the sect for 2 years, but he had already surpassed many ordinary disciples who were 15 or 16 years old. It had only been 2 years since he entered the school, but he had already surpassed many ordinary disciples who were 15 or 16 years old. Now it was almost time for class to start. He seized the last bit of time. He had to memorize this passage. As the Tao, don't bother with the formula and keep the truth. All the joints in the Naiwen have the spirit. The boy turned his head and saw 5 or 6 boys about his age making faces at him from a few meters away. One of the chubby boys shouted, "Yi Zhenji, your pants fell." Right after he said that, the other boys burst out laughing. The boy named Yi Zhenji glared at them fiercely, then turned around and continued to memorize. As the Tao, don't bother with the formula and keep the truth. Another plum flew over and hit him squarely. Although he had spiritual aura in his body, these boys weren't ordinary people. They used spiritual aura to hit him with plums, so it was really painful. Yi Zhenji understood he couldn't memorize anymore, so he put the book away and turned around with a fierce expression. "What do you want to do?" However, although he looked fierce, the others weren't scared. The chubby boy made faces at his companions. "Look, he's trying to scare us." Someone immediately pointed at him and laughed at him. "Yi Zhenji, aren't you afraid your pants will fall again?" Yi Zhenji's expression darkened, but he knew he couldn't beat them. Many of them were the descendants of the martial uncles in the school. They had been taught since they were young, so their cultivation levels were higher than his. He couldn't even beat one of them. Seeing that he didn't speak, the boys simply threw another plum at him. "Why aren't you dodging? Aren't you very powerful?" No matter what the teacher asked, you always answered. "What? You don't dare to do it now? Why are you being polite with him? Let's beat him up first. I've been so annoyed by him these past few days." An impetuous boy jumped out and shouted while pointing at him. The children were provoked and swarmed up to her. Yi Zhenji immediately turned around and ran. He knew he couldn't beat them, but he also didn't want to be beaten by them. If he ran to the front, they wouldn't dare to beat him, because there were others around. But he didn't realize this idea. Before he could run far, he was hit by a plum, causing him to stagger. One of the boys immediately grabbed his sleeve, and the boys surrounded him and started beating him. These boys were smart and knew they couldn't act recklessly, so they only used their fists and feet, without using spiritual aura. However, this made him feel even more pain. Yi Zhenji was surrounded in the middle. He held his head, gritted his teeth, and didn't say a word. It was just pain. He'd be fine once he endured it. In any case, he was already used to it. Emotienga frowned. She just came to Mengxua Hall early, but she unexpectedly saw such a scene. She gently flicked her sleeves, and the children who were punching and kicking the boys in a circle immediately felt a strong wind sweep over them, and they were immediately knocked to the ground. Who? Who? A chubby boy crawled up and shouted angrily. Who dares to hit me? I'll call my father. How about calling your father? Emotienga looked at him coldly and took over the conversation. It was only then that the children saw her. They were instantly tongue-tied. Emo. Grandmaster Emo. Emotienga knew many of these children were juniors of cultivators in the school, so they developed arrogant and willful temperaments. She just didn't expect them to be arrogant to this extent. At such a young age, they already knew how to bully their fellow disciples. What are you waiting for? Go to the training office and receive your punishment. Grandmaster Emo. Upon hearing what she said, the children shouted. We're just. Unfortunately, they couldn't even defend themselves. Emotienga didn't intend to listen to them. She helped the beaten boy up, turned her head and said, Hurry up and go. Yes. The children left unhappily. They weren't stupid. Grandmaster Emo was Patriarch Jinghe's advanced inner disciple, so they didn't dare to say anything to Grandmaster Emo despite their status. If they made Grandmaster Emo angry again, their punishment would be even heavier. Emotienga turned her head to look at the child she helped up. She had some impression of this child because every time she gave sermons, he repeatedly answered questions and was praised by the cultivator in charge. The cultivator in charge once told her this child came from the secular world. He had no foundation and his aptitude was ordinary, so he wasn't valued much. However, he was very hardworking and knew how to work hard. People like him would most likely achieve something. At that moment, the child looked up and saluted her. Thank you for saving me, Grandmaster Emo. Emotienga showed a faint smile. She cast a small spell to heal the bruises on his body. What's going on? Do they often beat you? Yijinji looked at her cautiously and nodded slightly. Then why didn't you say anything? Yijinji's expression darkened. He answered, They all have backers. I don't, so it's useless to say anything. Upon hearing this, Emotienga couldn't help but sigh. Even Xianqing School couldn't avoid this kind of problem. Disciples without foundation would inevitably be bullied. Then don't you feel bad about being beaten by them? The child bit his lip and nodded cautiously. I'm not afraid. When I succeed in my cultivation, they naturally won't dare to bully me anymore. What he said was quite ambitious. Emotienga nodded inwardly and said with a smile. When you succeed in your cultivation, you're only in the first layer of the aura refining realm right now, and your aptitude is also ordinary. How long do you want to wait? Her words made Yijinji hang his head. He also knew his chances were slim, but if he didn't think that way, what else could he do? Emotienga couldn't help but think of herself. Didn't she also think the same way? Although her aptitude wasn't good, and her path to immortality was uncertain, she firmly believed she'd succeed, even though sometimes she also felt it was hopeless. She became a little interested in this child and asked, What's your name? Yijinji. Yi as in Yi, Zhen as in real, and Ji as in fated chance. Yijinji. Turns out your surname is Yi, Emotienga said. In that case, we can be considered half from the same clan. Yijinji was surprised. Grandmaster Emo, isn't your surname Emo? Emotienga smiled. I followed my mother's surname. My father's surname is actually Yi. Oh. Emotienga smiled again and said, If they bully you again next time, just come and tell me. Huh. Yijinji suddenly raised his head and stared at her in astonishment. He was grateful to be saved by Grandmaster Emo, but he didn't have much hope. It was just this time. After those people were punished, they'd still bully him in the future. After all, Grandmaster Emo wasn't anyone to him. But now Grandmaster Emo said this. Grandmaster Emo, you mean? Emotienga repeated patiently. If they beat you again in the future, just come and tell me. I'll help you. Yijinji immediately jumped up upon hearing her confirmation. Really? Grandmaster Emo, you'll help me and won't let them bully me again? The child's face instantly bloomed with joy. Grandmaster Emo, you're really good to me. Ever since I left home, no one has been this good to me. Ever since I came here, they've been bullying me. They secretly cut my belt, causing me to drop my pants in front of everyone. At this point, he was a little embarrassed. I'm sorry, Grandmaster Emo. I shouldn't have said this in front of you. It doesn't matter. Since she had nothing to do, Emotienga didn't mind listening to a child's complaints. If you have anything to say, just say it. This child probably hadn't complained to anyone before, so he immediately became a chatterbox. When I was at home, my father always said how good it was to cultivate. He said our family was originally a cultivation clan, but it declined, so we had no choice but to move to the secular world. Since I was a child, I've always yearned to cultivate. Later, a martial uncle happened to pass by and discovered I had spiritual roots, so I followed him to Enchanting school. But now, I feel cultivators are very annoying. Chapter 140. Emotienga's heart skipped a beat. She asked, "Where's your home?" Yizhenji widened his eyes in confusion. "My home?" Emotienga repeated. "Your home in the secular world." Although he didn't understand what this grandmaster wanted to do, he still answered honestly. "My home is in Tong and City in Weigua. Have you heard of it, Grandmaster?" Tong and City in Weigua. Emotienga muttered and frowned. It seemed to be the one second uncle mentioned. She asked again, "Do you know the name Yicheng?" Yizhenji looked confused. I think Patriarch Grandpa's name is Yicheng, but I'm not sure." Patriarch Grandpa. Second uncle moved Yi clan out of Mount Qingmeng about 20 years ago. At that time, the Patriarch Yicheng, who stayed in the secular world, was in his 40s and had very weak 5 spiritual roots. Now he should be in his 60s. "Tell me about your family. Let me hear about it." A hint of vigilance appeared in Yizhenji's eyes. "Grandmaster, what do you want to hear?" How could Emotienga not see that this child was wary of her? She smiled and said, "Could it be that there's something in your family that I covet? Just tell me." Yizhenji thought about it and felt that it was reasonable. This grandmaster was the advanced inner disciple of a nascent soul cultivator. What could his declining family have that could attract her attention? He asked, "Grandmaster, what do you want to know? Just tell me. For example, what's the situation of your family? Did you also live in Kunwu?" When he mentioned his family's past, a smile appeared on Yizhenji's face. He said proudly, "My father said our family used to be in Kunwu, and our ancestors even produced many core formation cultivators. In the end, there was a granduncle who formed his gold core when he was just over 100 years old. At that time, he was famous in West Kunwu." At this point, a regretful expression appeared on his little face. But this granduncle also passed away more than 20 years ago. There weren't many people in our family, and there weren't many people with spiritual roots, so our family declined just like that. "So there are no cultivators in your family now?" "Not really." Yizhenji tilted his head and said, "In fact, I'm not sure. My father said that at that time, there was another granduncle who was a foundation establishment cultivator, and he left after sending us to the secular world. However, that granduncle is old and hasn't contacted us for so many years, so we don't know if he's still around." "Didn't your granduncle leave behind any message talismans?" I don't know. These are all things that happened before I was born. My father didn't tell me anything." It was normal for the child not to know such a question. Emotienga had already made up her mind, so she no longer said anything. She raised her finger and forced out a drop of blood. With a wave of her spiritual aura, that drop of blood immediately rushed towards the child. "Grandmaster Yu." Yizhenji turned pale with fright. However, before he could finish speaking, the drop of blood already entered the space between his eyebrows and disappeared without a trace. Emotienga sensed that her blood essence entered the space between his eyebrows without any hindrance at all. It easily fused with him. This child was indeed her blood relative. "Grandmaster." Yizhenji sobered up and stared at her in horror. "What's this?" As Emotienga stared at the child, she was also a bit surprised. Kunwu was so big, but Yi Clan's child actually happened to come to Enchanting school. This is a drop of blood identification. Ah. Yi Zhenji was bewildered. Drop of blood identification? My blood essence is compatible with yours, and there's no rejection at all. This means we're blood relatives. Yi Zhenji was completely dumbfounded. Mo Tiange stared at him. I don't know how we should address each other, but the core formation granduncle you mentioned died more than 20 years ago should be my father. *****, Martial uncle, you're? Xiuqin was stunned to see Mo Tiange leading a boy into the side hall of Shangqing Palace. Ever since Mo Tiange taught them a lesson, Qin Qi Shu, and Hua became obedient. Even the other 12 people who heard about her methods also became a lot more restrained. They no longer gossiped in front of her, and their speech and behavior also became respectful and courteous. Mo Tiange faintly glanced at her. This is my grandnephew. I brought him here to pay respects to master. Grandnephew? Xiuqin was stunned. This martial uncle Mo just went to Mengxue Hall and brought back a grandnephew? Nevertheless, she was smart and didn't say much. She just bowed and said, Yes, Grandmaster is still in the main hall. Martial uncle can go and pay respects to him. Mo Tiange didn't linger and walked around Xiuqin while holding Yi Zhenji's hand. Yi Zhenji was very excited. He turned to look at Xiuqin, and when they were far away he whispered, Grandmaster, you're so proud. Last time, I saw Grandmaster Jinghe's martial uncle come to Mengxue Hall to pass a message, but he didn't even look at our manager. Mo Tiange smiled. The manager of Mengxue Hall was only an ordinary early-stage foundation building cultivator. So how could he enter these women's eyes? They'd been with nascent soul grandmasters for a long time, so they didn't even pay attention to ordinary core formation cultivators. Yi Zhenji looked around again, feeling very curious. Ever since he came to Xianqing School, he'd only been to the main hall on the main peak once, and spent the rest of his time in Mengxue Hall. He hadn't even seen an ordinary foundation building martial uncle's Immortal's Cave, let alone a nascent soul grandmaster's Immortal's Cave. Mo Tiange couldn't help but smile as she looked at his innocent and happy appearance. This child had been very excited ever since he recognized himself as his relative. He originally thought he didn't have any backing, and would definitely be bullied by others. Unexpectedly, in the blink of an eye, he had a grandmaster who was related to him by blood. Those children who bullied him before couldn't compare to him. So he was so happy that he didn't know what to say. She recalled how Yi Zhenji proudly stuck out his chest when she explained the reason to the cultivator in charge of Mengxue Hall, which made her feel both funny and pitiful. Zhenji, our seniority can't be determined in a short time. I'm only 10 years older than you, so you can just call me auntie. There's no need to call me grandmaster. Oh. Yi Zhenji raised his head to look at her, then called out in a low voice, Auntie. Mo Tiange smiled and stroked his head. You don't have to be so reserved. We're relatives, so we're different from them. Yi Zhenji finally became a bit more courageous. I understand. Auntie, can I follow you in the future? And you should be able to. But before that, I have to report to the Grandmaster. In fact, Mo Tiange also wasn't sure. Her identity now was indeed different. Taking care of a blood-related junior shouldn't be a big problem. But she was now living in Lord Taoist Jinghe's Immortal's Cave, and this master of hers wasn't serious. She really couldn't say for sure. Auntie. Yi Zhenji raised his head to look at her, then asked worriedly, Won't this make things difficult for you? Mo Tiange was stunned. Just now she unconsciously frowned. But this child was actually so sharp? Yi Zhenji said, Auntie, if you're in trouble, you don't have to worry about me. Now that they know you're my granduncle, they won't dare to bully me anymore. Seeing the child's serious expression, Mo Tiange smiled and answered seriously, You don't have to worry. You'll understand after you meet the Grandmaster. As they spoke, the two of them arrived at the main hall. In Shangqing Palace, aside from Lord Taoist Jinghe himself, there were only the maids and her, so there was no need for anyone to report to them. Leading Yi Zhenji into the main hall, Mo Tiange saw that Lord Taoist Jinghe was still lying on his dragon chair, enjoying the service of the maids while flipping through an unknown book. He was also mumbling something. Master. Lord Taoist Jinghe didn't even raise his head. Oh, you're back. Why did you bring back a little guy today? Emotinga let go of Yi Jinji's hand and signaled him with her eyes. The child very cleverly knelt down and kowtowed. Yi Jinji greets the Grandmaster. Emotinga said, Master, this child is related to me by blood. I want to bring him back to teach him personally. I sincerely ask for your permission. And Lord Taoist Jinghe was surprised. He then turned around and casually waved his hand at Yi Jinji, signaling him to stand up. Then he turned to Emotinga. What's going on? Where did this child come from? Emotinga patiently reported. When I went to Mengxua Hall today, this child happened to be bullied by others, so I conveniently saved him. Unexpectedly, this child actually came from my clan in the secular world. Oh, what a coincidence. Lord Taoist Jinghe wasn't interested in these trivial matters of the branch family. However, when he saw Yi Jinji standing up and shrinking behind Emotinga timidly, his interest was piqued. Little fella, come here and let Grandmaster have a look. Yi Jinji raised his head to look at Emotinga. It was only after he saw her nod that he carefully moved to Lord Taoist Jinghe's side. He had never seen a nascent Soul Realm patriarch before. How imposing. The little guy looks pretty good. He looks like you. As Lord Taoist Jinghe spoke, he grabbed Yi Jinji's wrist. Your aptitude is a bit lacking. You have 3 spiritual roots. And fortunately, all of your spiritual roots are fine, so building your foundation shouldn't be a problem. If you work hard, there's also hope for you to form your gold core. Yi Jinji widened his eyes. He wasn't sad at all that the sovereign said his aptitude was a bit lacking, because disciples who could enter Xianxing school all had excellent aptitudes. He only had 3 spiritual roots, so he could only be considered barely qualified. However, the ancestral master said that if he worked hard, he would be able to form his gold core. This was something he had never thought of. That'll do. This kind of trivial matter, do as you see fit. Lord Taoist Jinghe let go of Yi Jinji's hand, then lay back down. You haven't formed your gold core yet, so you don't have the qualifications to accept disciples. Just leave him by your side for now. Emotinga was delighted to receive his consent. Thank you, master. He thank me? Girl, you've been cursing me behind my back a lot. Forget it. Lord Taoist Jinghe waved his hand. Go. Emotinga didn't feel embarrassed, even though she was exposed in public. In any case, it was a fact that this cheap master of hers didn't act respectfully. She only saluted him one last time, then took Yi Jinji away. Jinji, now that the sovereign has agreed, you can stay by my side from now on. I'll try my best to help you, but you also have to work hard, understand? Yi Jinji's face flushed with excitement. A nascent soul sovereign. He actually met a nascent soul sovereign. He thought for a moment, then asked, Auntie, do I still have to go to Mengxua Hall in the future? Of course, Emotinga said. You haven't finished learning the Taoist scriptures, so you still have to go. What? You don't want to go? No. Yi Jinji repeatedly waved his hand, revealing a slightly embarrassed smile. He then secretly said, Auntie, I actually want to go. I have Auntie now, so Jian and the others won't dare to bully me anymore. I just want to go and see their faces. Emotinga couldn't help but laugh when she heard what he said. Sure enough, he was still a child. He was bullied in the past, but now he wanted to hold his head high. Emotinga nodded. There's nothing wrong with being quick to repay gratitude and enmity, but you mustn't be too stubborn, understand? When they arrived at Mingxin residence, Emotinga opened the restriction. After thinking for a moment, she took out a blank jade tablet and engraved some instructions on it. She then handed it to Yi Jinji. In the future, use this to open the defensive formation. Once they entered Mingxin residence, a small spiritual beast pounced on them and squeaked, startling Yi Jinji. Emotinga said to Yi Jinji, This is Auntie's spiritual beast. You can call it Xiaohua. It's very smart, and its cultivation level is equivalent to an early-stage foundation-building cultivator. In the future, if you need anything, you can call it. She then crouched down and stroked the Inferno Beast's head. This is Jinji. He's my nephew. In the future, treat him like you treat me, understand? The Inferno Beast squeaked again and intimately bit the hem of Yi Jinji's robe. It didn't stop until Yi Jinji also stroked its head. Emotinga smiled. She took out a jade bottle and poured several medicinal pills into it. Eat them and go play. If you want to go to the back mountain, that's fine. The inferno beast rolled its tongue and swallowed the medicinal pills. It then nodded at her and ran out of Mingxin residence, probably heading towards the spiritual beast courtyard in the back mountain. This inferno beast's cultivation level rose very quickly. Ever since they moved to Shangqing Palace, Missouri Tiange let it roam freely, so it often ran to the back mountain to play. Because there were restrictions in the Immortal's Cave, Mo Tiange also let it go. After leading Yi Jinji into the courtyard, Mo Tiange introduced everything to him one by one. This is Auntie's Immortal's Cave. This is the concocting room. This is the tool refining room. And this is the cultivation room. As for this resting room, it'll be yours from now on. If you need anything, you can just ask the martial uncles here. They're the Grandmaster's maids, so all the affairs in Shangqing Palace are managed by them. Got it, Auntie. Yi Jinji stood in the resting room and carefully touched the bed made of cold jade. There weren't many things in the room, but everything was so exquisite that he couldn't help but stare. Where's your luggage? Upon hearing Mo Tiange's question, Yi Jinji took off the Qianquan bag hanging from his waist and poured out the things somewhat embarrassedly. There were some clothes, a few Taoist scriptures and mental cultivation techniques, some children's toys, 3 spirit stones, and several worn-out jade bottles. Mo Tiange opened them to take a look. There were healing medicinal pills and aura-nourishing pills, but there were only 2 or 3 of them. Among them, there was even an aura-nourishing pill that seemed to be half-eaten. Yi Jinji seemed to feel his things were too shabby, so he said with a red face, "Auntie, when I left home, there wasn't much left in the house. I only left these few things, and Grandpa Patriarch gave them all to me." Mo Tiange smiled. Presumably, those people in the Yi clan with meager spiritual roots were still unwilling to leave, so even though they stayed in the secular world, they still cultivated. Moreover, most of the valuable things were with second uncle, so they originally didn't have anything valuable. After 20 years, it was very normal for there to be nothing left. She thought for a moment, then took out 7 or 8 jade bottles from her Qianquan bag. These 2 bottles contain aura-nourishing pills. There are 100 pills in each bottle. You should know how to use them. These are aura-converging pills. They're also medicinal pills for cultivation, and their effects are 10 times better than aura-nourishing pills. However, you'd better increase your cultivation level before taking them. The medicinal effects are too strong, and your current cultivation level is too low. These are aura-purifying pills. For every 10 aura-nourishing pills you take, you'll have to take 1 to expel pill toxins. These are refreshing pills. They're used to detoxify poisons. Presumably, all the poisons you've come into contact with can be detoxified with these pills. These are restorative panaceas. You'll use up all your spiritual aura in a fight of magical powers, so taking 1 can restore a lot of your spiritual aura. These are mind-clearing pills. They're used to calm the mind. If you feel uneasy, you can take 1. Seeing that Yi Jinji's hands were trembling while holding the jade bottles, Mo Tiange smiled and took out a small pouch. There are 200 spirit stones in here. I know you new disciples haven't graduated from Mengxua Hall yet, so you can't get a disciple's share. I'll give you these first for your cultivation. He only had 2 spirit stones in his possession, and he was reluctant to use them for a long time. Now that he suddenly received 200 spirit stones, Yi Jinji was completely dumbfounded. But it wasn't over yet. Mo Tiange thought for a moment, then took out the greenwood sword and the spirit-gathering pearl she no longer used. Touching these 2 things, she heaved a soft sigh. The spirit-gathering pearl wasn't a good thing, but it was left behind by her father. Moreover, it also guided her on the path of cultivation. After thinking for a while, she put it away and replaced it with a spirit-gathering formation she made herself. This is the greenwood sword. My second uncle passed it on to me. Now, I'll pass it on to you. This thing has been refined by a core formation cultivator, so ordinary spirit tools can't compare to it. You have to use it well. As for this spirit-gathering formation, when you cultivate, you can place it in the surroundings to increase the density of spiritual aura. Yi Jinji received these things in a daze. Although he was only a new disciple, After entering Enchanting school, he still had some experience. He had seen spirit tools in the hands of fellow disciples, but they hadn't graduated from Mengxue Hall, so the school wouldn't give them spirit tools. Those who could have spirit tools were all people with powerful backgrounds. A small disciple from the secular world like him could only look at them with envy. However, this greenwood sword was obviously a high-grade spirit tool. It was much better than the ones he had seen before. "Auntie, this is a lot. Since you're my relative, I'll naturally give you the best." Emotinga's expression turned serious. "However, you also have to remember that you can only rely on yourself to walk on the path of cultivation. If you're complacent and don't move forward, then no matter how many treasures you have, it'll be useless." Yi Zhenji was startled by Emotinga's stern shout, but he soon regained his composure. He obediently lowered his head and said, "I understand. I'll cultivate diligently and live up to Auntie's expectations." Emotinga was very satisfied that this child was so obedient. She stroked his head and said, "All right, Auntie's going to cultivate. It's good for you to cultivate and familiarize yourself with it first. If you need anything, just call me outside the cultivation room." "Yes." Emotinga turned around and was about to leave, but Yi Zhenji hastily called out, "Auntie." Emotinga stopped. When she saw Yi Zhenji looking at her, she blushed and said in a low voice, "I'm hungry." Stunned, she couldn't help but knock her own head, then said with a smile, "Auntie hasn't eaten for a long time, so I forgot you still need to eat. Wait a moment. I'll call someone to bring you some food." After returning to the cultivation room, Emotinga first sent a summoning talisman to Xiuqin, asking her to call someone to bring her food every day. After that, she arranged a formation and entered the virtual sky world. Standing inside the virtual sky world, she felt the gentle breeze and exhaled. However, she didn't immediately enter the hut to cultivate. Instead, she sat down by the stream. She didn't expect to run into someone from Yi Clan. She never grew up in Yi Clan, so Yi Clan only existed in her imagination. However, before second uncle passed away, he always told her to take care of Yi Clan if she had the ability in the future. Now that she ran into a child from Yi Clan, she naturally couldn't ignore him. This child told her that Yi Clan lived a good life in the secular world. There were still several cultivators in the clan, although their cultivation levels were low, and not worth mentioning in Kunwu. They were immortals in the eyes of mortals. Yi Clan quickly gained a foothold in Wei country. Now they were rich and healthy, and they even became Marquis Chong Ningho in Wei country. Hearing this, Emotinga felt relieved. In the past, Yi Clan was forced to move to the secular world because apart from second uncle, they didn't have any real cultivators. Even if they had spiritual roots, they only had 5 spiritual roots and could barely reach the second or third layer of the aura refining realm by relying on medicinal pills. However, living in the secular world was already enough. Far away from the bloody storms of the cultivation world, they could still enjoy glory, splendor, wealth, and rank in the secular world. What else could they ask for? Even if Lord Daoist Jinghe's clan in the secular world produced a nascent soul cultivator and a core formation cultivator, it was still just an ordinary rich clan. At first, those people from Yi Clan also gave up. However, 10 years ago, Yi Zhenji was born and was unexpectedly tested to have 3 spiritual roots. Yi Clan was wild with joy. Later, when Xianqing school disciples ran errands in the secular world, the patriarch of Yi Clan treated Yi Zhenji with a lot of money, so Yi Zhenji was able to return to Kunwu and even entered a famous clan. This matter was only a trivial matter, so even the stewards hall of Clear Spring Peak didn't know Yi Zhenji's identity and origin. Thus, they didn't report it to Lord Daoist Jinghe or Master Daoist Shoujing, so Emotinga naturally had no way of knowing. If it wasn't for Lord Daoist Jinghe tormenting her and Luo Fengxue making her go to Mengxue Hall, she would have probably waited until she formed her gold core and went to the secular world to fulfill second uncle's wish before she learned of Yi Zhenji's existence. At that time, if Yi Zhenji's luck wasn't good, he might have already become old. Yi Clan racked their brains to send Yi Zhenji to Xianqing school. First, they didn't want to waste Yi Zhenji's talent. Second, They probably wanted to revitalize their clan. However, Yi Zhenji's spiritual roots were only ordinary. He was already very lucky to be able to enter a big cultivation group, so Yi clan didn't have any delusions. However, because of this, Emotianga had another thought. It had only been a few years since Yi clan left Kunwu, so they obviously still wanted to return to Kunwu. If they found out about her existence, she was afraid they might have some other thoughts. Thinking up to this point, Emotianga made a decision. That being the case, she didn't plan to let Yi clan know of her existence for the time being. If they found out, some troubles would inevitably arise. Of course, she didn't want to hide it forever. When the time was right, she would go back to Yi clan and tell them second uncle's last wish. But in that case, she would inevitably warn Yi clan that if they didn't have enough high-level cultivators, they shouldn't think about returning to Kunwu. How many small cultivation clans had been wiped out in Kunwu? Yu clan from Danding School still had several foundation-building cultivators, but after a disaster, they declined just like that. Emotianga didn't know whether they could survive or not. In that case, it would be better to stay in the secular world and enjoy glory, splendor, wealth, and rank. If they produced a descendant with good spiritual roots, she would naturally lend a helping hand. Emotianga shook her head and threw these thoughts to the back of her mind. She stood up and returned to the small room inside the virtual sky world, preparing to cultivate. Yi Zhenji hadn't even finished reading the Taoist scriptures, so he still had a long way to go. When the time came, she would give him some medicinal pills and ask her master to help him. Presumably, building his foundation wouldn't be a problem, and he might even have a high chance of forming his gold core. After making this decision, Emotianga sat down, sank her aura into her dantian, and started today's cultivation. Chapter 141. Auntie. Upon hearing Yi Zhenji's cheerful voice, Emotianga came out of the virtual sky world and opened the cultivation room's restriction with a wave of her hand. With a smile on his face, Yi Zhenji bumped into her. "What's wrong?" Yi Zhenji ran over and looked up at her. "Auntie, I went to Mingxua Hall today. When Jian and the others saw me, they all ran far away. It was so funny." Emotianga smiled and stroked his head. "Are you very happy?" Yi Zhenji nodded vigorously. "I've always thought that when I built my foundation, I'd beat them all to the ground, so they wouldn't dare to bully me." Emotianga smiled. When she was in Emo family's village, she also had the same idea. She wanted to read good books, listen to her mother, and when she grew up, she would teach Tianjun and the others a lesson. In the end, Tianjun didn't bully her anymore, and she also walked on a different path. Although they don't dare to bully you now, you still have to work hard to build your foundation. You can't always rely on others, understand? "And Auntie, I'll work hard to cultivate and won't embarrass you," Yi Zhenji said earnestly. "I know my aptitude isn't good, but before I came to Kunwu, Grandpa Patriarch told me that hard work can make up for my lack of talent. As long as I cultivate hard, I still have hope of advancing. It's good that you understand." Emotianga nodded with a smile. "At first my aptitude was worse than yours, but in the end, I still built my foundation. Therefore, although aptitude is important, hard work and fated chances can't be underestimated." Yi Zhenji blinked. He understood the second half, but what did the first half mean? "Auntie, they said you were accepted as a disciple by the Grandmaster when you were only in the foundation building realm, because your aptitude was higher than that of a single spiritual root. Why did you say your aptitude was bad? If your aptitude was bad, the Grandmaster wouldn't have accepted you as a disciple, right?" Both of these sentences are correct. Auntie's spiritual root is a very special kind of spiritual root. Before I built my foundation, I always thought my aptitude was bad, but after I built my foundation, I realized that wasn't the case. "Oh, but if that's the case, you were able to build your foundation because your aptitude is good, right?" This question startled Emotianga. The vision triggered during her foundation building had indeed made her suspicious for a very long time. Emotianga didn't know whether her success in building her foundation was related to the spiritual roots of the origin or not. Maybe the art of Sinu also had something to do with it. Although she didn't know what the spiritual roots of the origin were before she built her foundation, and considered them to be almost useless spiritual roots, maybe she benefited from the spiritual roots of the origin when she advanced. That's not necessarily the case. Andy also had a hard time cultivating in the qi condensation realm. At that time, it was my second uncle who took care of me and provided me with a large amount of medicinal pills for my cultivation. That's why I was able to reach the foundation building realm one day. Yijinji pondered for a moment, then smiled again. I understand. Auntie has granduncle to take care of her, and I also have Auntie to take care of me. I'll work hard to make a realm breakthrough just like Auntie. This child was smart and sensible. He didn't need anyone to take care of him all the time. Just a few words of advice from time to time would do. Emotinga chuckled and patted his head. It's good that you know. Alright, you've been dawdling for so long. Hurry up and cultivate. Alright, I'll go now. Yijinji answered obediently, then went back to cultivate. Emotinga closed her eyes and released her divine sense. The cultivation technique Yijinji practiced was the same as that of all new disciples. It was Xianqing school's most basic cultivation technique, the Nanhua Heart Sutra. In fact, all new disciples of Xianqing school, regardless of their aptitude, spiritual roots, or status, had to practice Nanhua Heart Sutra first to lay their foundation. When Emotinga entered the school several years ago, although she wasn't a new disciple, she still roughly studied it. This Taoist scripture was indeed an ideal introductory cultivation technique. This cultivation technique didn't require the attribute of one's spiritual roots. The cultivation speed wasn't fast, and it couldn't be used in fights of magical powers. However, it allowed one to comprehend the Tao of heaven and earth, cultivate one's heart, and cultivate one's nature. If one could cultivate Nanhua Heart Sutra properly before practicing other cultivation techniques, there would be a lot fewer barriers to one's nature. Although Yijinji's spiritual roots weren't obvious, he had a good understanding of Taoist scriptures. His nature and perception were also pretty good. Emotinga watched him for a while. Seeing that his cultivation was going smoothly, she no longer paid attention to him and entered the virtual sky world to continue cultivating. Time passed quickly. After she finished cultivating, Emotinga went to Mengxua school to give Yijinji some pointers, then entered the virtual sky world to cultivate. And so on. After 2 years of peace and tranquility, 2 major events happened on Clear Spring Peak at the same time. The first matter was that Master Taoist Xianin was about to enter closed-door meditation to attack the nascent soul realm. When Emotinga learned about this, she was very happy. Senior martial brother Xianin was their master's #1 disciple. Not only was he the earliest to enter the school, but his aptitude was also the best. He was already more than 400 years old now, yet he was still stuck in the core formation realm. Now that he finally entered closed-door meditation to attempt to form his nascent soul, Emotinga inwardly prayed that this martial uncle or senior martial brother, who always took care of her, could smoothly form his nascent soul. If senior martial brother Xianin really succeeded, she would have to call him martial uncle Xianin instead. According to the rules of the immortal cultivation world, once one reached the nascent soul stage, one would be a grandmaster. Although the master who entered the sect was still the master, the disciples of the same sect still had to address each other according to their cultivation level. The other thing was that Taoist Shou Jing had been in isolation for 2 years and successfully entered the late stage of the core formation realm. When Emotinga heard this, she just smiled and said nothing. Later, when she ran into Luo Fengxue, she tried to sound her out, but she also calmly rejected her. Speaking of which, she still hadn't met this senior martial brother Shou Jing. When she officially became her master's disciple 2 years ago, this senior martial brother Shou Jing had been in closed-door meditation and rarely left his cave. These 2 things weren't big, but they weren't small either. In the past 2 years, Emotinga had been dealing with Shangqing Palace's affairs and gradually got closer to the power center of Xianqing School. So she also learned some things. Xianqing School had a total of 5 nascent soul cultivators. Among them, the head Grand Supreme Elder, Lord Taoist Jinyang, was in the late stage of the nascent soul realm, Lord Taoist Jinghe was in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm, and the remaining Lord Taoist Lingxiu, Lord Taoist Miaoyi, and Lord Taoist Huayan were in the early stage of the nascent soul realm. Lord Taoist Junyang was undoubtedly the pillar of Xianqing school, but the other nascent soul cultivators were also the foundation of Xianqing school. Losing one nascent soul cultivator would greatly reduce the school's strength. Right now Lord Taoist Lingxiu's lifespan was about to run out. In 100 years at most, this Lord Taoist would pass away. This was also the reason why Master Taoist Xianin was in closed-door meditation to advance to the nascent soul realm, and the reason why he was so happy about Master Taoist Shou Jing advancing to the late stage of the core formation realm. When a nascent soul cultivator passed away, another nascent soul cultivator would be needed to fill the gap to ensure the school's strength and status. Of course, these things had nothing to do with her. Right now, Imo Tiange encountered something that made her not know whether to laugh or cry. Senior Martial Sister Imo Tiange had been very careful since she was ordered to go to the main peak by her master. But she still heard a surprised and gentle call from behind her. She instantly had the urge to step on the white silk handkerchief and fly back to her cave. She adjusted her expression, turned around and smiled. Junior Martial Brother Bai. This Junior Martial Brother Bai wasn't Jean Bai. Although Jean Bai had always been called Little Bai, Martial Uncle Bai, or Junior Martial Brother Bai, his surname was Jean. This guy's real surname was Bai, and his name was Yanfei. He was the disciple of Xianqing School's head Grand Supreme Elder, Lord Taoist Junyang. He had a single spiritual root that was hard to come by in 100 years. As soon as he entered the school, Lord Taoist Junyang made an exception and accepted him as his disciple. This Junior Martial Brother Bai was now 25 years old and had been in the foundation building realm for 3 years. Ever since Imo Tiange was officially accepted as Lord Taoist Jinghe's disciple, almost all the affairs in Shangqing Palace were handed over to her. She was even in charge of some matters related to the Grand Supreme Elders. As a result, she gradually came into contact with the real heavenly favored ones in the school. The so-called heavenly favored ones could be said to be the elite disciples among elite disciples. In Yunwu sect in the past, foundation-building cultivators could accept disciples, so elite disciples were only slightly better than ordinary disciples. Big cultivation groups like Xianqing School, on the other hand, were different. Only core formation cultivators were qualified to accept disciples. Needless to say, disciples who could become disciples of core formation cultivators had to have outstanding talents, but they also had to have a good attitude and comprehension. Such elite disciples were naturally much better than ordinary disciples. However, heavenly favored ones could only be called disciples under nascent soul cultivators, and their cultivation levels had to be especially outstanding. For example, there was one in Clear Spring Peak, Master Taoist Shoujing. He started cultivating at the age of 8, and became Lord Taoist Jinghe's disciple as soon as he entered the school. He built his foundation at the age of 20, and formed his gold core at the age of 78. In Xianqing School, he was one of the core formation cultivators most likely to form their nascent souls. Imo Tiange could also be considered a disciple of Lord Taoist Jinghe. She was in the middle stage of the foundation building realm at such a young age, and received her master's attention and high hopes. Forming her gold core was only a matter of time, and she might even form her nascent soul. This Bai Yanfei was the same. In terms of status, he was the last disciple of the head Grand Supreme Elder, Lord Taoist Junyang. In terms of cultivation level, he built his foundation at the age of 22, and was now 25. His future was boundless. If it was before, Imo Tiange wouldn't have dared to believe she could make friends with someone with such status. But now she only had a headache. This was how things started. She was now the one running errands for her master. A few days ago, she happened to go to Lord Taoist Junyang's Immortal's cave to handle some matters for her master. She didn't know what was wrong with this Junior Martial Brother Bai, but as soon as he saw her, not only was he overly enthusiastic, but he also invited her to meet him from time to time. In the beginning, Imo Tiange didn't think there was any harm in making friends with such a person. Unexpectedly, after several visits, she realized something was wrong. This junior marshal brother obviously didn't treat her as a senior marshal sister and junior marshal brother. He seemed to be pursuing her. Upon realizing this, whenever Bai Yanfei invited her again, she would find all kinds of reasons to dismiss him. However, for some unknown reason, the more she refused Bai Yanfei, the more enthusiastic he became. Almost every time she left Shangqing Palace, this person would use all kinds of methods to find out her whereabouts. He would then pretend to stick to her unintentionally, causing Mo Tiange to be afraid to go out recently. But even if she didn't dare to go out, she still had to go out. She had to carry out the things her master told her to do. If she accidentally ran into Bai Yanfei, she could only pretend she didn't know and think of a way to dismiss him. This matter made Mo Tiange feel strange. When she was a teenager, she always disguised as a man. When she came to Xianqing school, she changed her appearance to that of a woman. Moreover, she was always under Lord Daoist Jinghe's protection, so she had never experienced any pursuers. Now that one suddenly came, it made her want to avoid him like the plague. Seeing that she didn't look displeased, Bai Yanfei walked towards her with a smile. He was quite handsome, and he was also Lord Daoist Jinyang's last disciple, so he also had some admirers. However, Mo Tiange didn't have any feelings for him. Senior marshal sister Mo Bai Yanfei smiled at her. Long time no see. This time, Mo Tiange indeed hid for a long time. Because of this, she even asked Lord Daoist Jinghe not to go to Mengxua Hall. She holed up in Shangqing Palace every day and didn't go out. No matter what Bai Yanfei's intentions were, he was always polite and courteous to her face. So Mo Tiange answered with a smile. It's nothing. I've been practicing a secret technique recently, so I don't have time to go out. Really? Bai Yanfei's eyes brightened. What secret technique is it? Senior marshal sister, do you want to study it together? How could it be called a secret technique if I casually mentioned it? Mo Tiange paused for a moment, then squeezed out a smile. Junior marshal brother Bai, why are you here? Did you come to do something? Sort of, Bai Yanfei said vaguely, then said. Senior marshal sister, we haven't seen each other for a long time. Since we ran into each other, how about we have a good gathering? This isn't too convenient, right? Mo Tiange said. My master still has something he wants me to do. Junior marshal brother Bai, I'm sorry, but I'll take my leave first. She immediately got on the white silk handkerchief and flew towards Clear Spring Peak. Senior marshal sister. Bai Yanfei called out from behind her. Mo Tiange didn't dare to stay and didn't even look back. She flew back to Clear Spring Peak and rushed into Shangqing Palace. Mo Tiange only heaved a sigh of relief when she saw Bai Yanfei didn't follow her. She was really afraid of this junior marshal brother Bai. She really didn't understand. Although her identity wasn't ordinary now and her aptitude wasn't bad, there were many beautiful and outstanding female cultivators in Xianqing school. Was it necessary for him to chase after her like this? Why are you burning your buttocks? Lord Daoist Jinghe's voice rang in her ears. She didn't make it, so she went straight through the main entrance. Once she passed through the main entrance, she saw the main hall. Lord Daoist Jinghe was meditating, which was very rare. Now that he was disturbed by her, he was glaring at her while blowing his beard. Master, she called out obediently. Lord Daoist Jinghe glared at her and stopped meditating. What happened? I told you to go to the main peak to pass a message, but you ended up like this? Was there a wolf chasing after you? There wasn't a wolf, but there was someone, Mo Tiange answered. She'd been his disciple for a long time, so she didn't mind. She found a seat, sat down, and poured tea for herself. Someone. Lord Daoist Jinghe was surprised. Who was chasing you? Mo Tiange only drank half of her tea. She rolled her eyes and told him the truth. It was junior marshal brother Bai Yanfei from Morning Sun Peak. Bai Yanfei? Lord Daoist Jinghe thought for a while. Is he old Daoist Jinyang's disciple? Seeing Mo Tiange nodding, Lord Daoist Jinghe was even more surprised. Why was he chasing you? I also found it strange, Mo Tiange said. Junior marshal brother Bai was too enthusiastic. Ever since I met him, he often invited me out. I didn't want to go. He was doing it out of kindness. If I went, I'd be a bit overwhelmed. Kindness. Lord Taoist Jingha immediately understood and snorted. This brat is really bold. He actually wanted to attack my disciple. Attack? Mo Tiange stared at him with a puzzled expression. Master, junior martial brother Bai was very good to me. He didn't attack me at all. Oomph. Lord Taoist Jingha snorted even harder. He curled his lips and glared at her. Keep pretending. Do you dare to say you didn't say it for me to hear on purpose? Having been exposed, Mo Tiange immediately became well-behaved. Yes, master. I think this brat is very annoying, but it's not good to directly send him away, so I wanted to ask master to deal with him. Upon hearing what she said, Lord Taoist Jingha showed an expression that said that's more like it. He then raised his head complacently. Don't play tricks in front of master. You're just a little girl who's lived for more than 20 years. What else can you hide from me? Mo Tiange smiled modestly. Yes, but how could I compare to you, master? You've lived for more than 800 years, and you've almost become a demon. Lord Taoist Jingha felt refreshed after being flattered. However, he only laughed twice when he suddenly realized what she said wasn't quite right. Damn girl. You actually called me an old fart. No way. Mo Tiange immediately clasped her palms together. Master, I'm sincerely expressing my respect, and also asking you to help me deal with this matter. Lord Taoist Jingha's temperament was that he loved to brag and flatter others. Once Mo Tiange assumed this posture, he was immediately appeased. He merely let out a humph and cast her a sidelong glance. His tone became amiable. Tell me, what's going on with this brat? Mo Tiange said. I'm also quite muddle-headed. It's just that when I went to Morning Sun Peak to ask to see Martial Uncle Zhenyang, junior martial brother, Bai received me for a while. Later on, he often invited me out. This was the truth. She herself didn't understand what this junior martial brother Bai saw in her. Cultivation level? It wasn't that there weren't any young female cultivators in the middle stage of the foundation building realm in the school. Martial Uncle Miaoi of Blue Phoenix Peak had a senior martial sister in the middle stage of the foundation building realm in her 30s. That senior martial sister reached this stage through solid cultivation, unlike Mo Tiange, who reached this stage purely because of fated chances. Appearance? Mo Tiange thought her appearance wasn't bad, but in the cultivation world where beauties were as common as clouds, it didn't count as much. Identity? Being the disciple of a nascent soul grandmaster, Lord Taoist Jingha, was indeed an extremely high identity. But at the same time, whatever she had, that senior martial sister from Blue Phoenix Peak also had. Furthermore, that senior martial sister wasn't the only one. Martial Uncle Lingshu from Drifting Cloud Peak also had a junior martial sister, who was in her early 20s, and was even younger than her. Once Mo Tiange finished speaking, Lord Taoist Jingha pondered for a moment then nodded. This brat has a bit of insight. My Qin Jingha's disciple is naturally better than others. Mo Tiange clenched her teeth. Master. Upon seeing Mo Tiange's angry gaze, Lord Taoist Jingha immediately burst into laughter. Don't. Master is praising you. Of the two girls you mentioned, the one under Miaoi isn't as beautiful as you, and the one under Old Man Lingshu isn't as smart as you. If the three of them were placed in front of him to choose, he'd definitely choose you. In my opinion, this brat's Dao heart is definitely unstable. He wants to find someone to perform dual cultivation with, but he's too arrogant and doesn't want anyone who's slightly inferior. After picking and choosing, only these few people meet his requirements. He's known Miaoi and Old Man Lingshu's disciples since they were little, but he probably doesn't like either of them. As soon as he saw you, he felt you were better than the other two, so he naturally stuck to you. What he said was quite reasonable. Mo Tiange was silent for a while. Master, in that case, help me deal with it. I don't want to think about dual cultivation right now. Lord Taoist Jingha said arrogantly. That's natural. How could it be that easy to hook up with my disciple? He then changed the topic and said with a smile. Tiange, you really don't want to consider dual cultivation? In fact, dual cultivation has a lot of benefits. No. Mo Tiange refused without thinking. You really don't want to? I'm telling you, forget about that brat. Master will choose a good one for you. I already said I don't want to. Lord Taoist Jinghe felt bored by her resolute refusal. Fine, fine. You're just like that stinky brat. You don't want to be taught at all. How can I be taught about this kind of thing? Master, have you ever performed dual cultivation? Lord Taoist Jinghe choked on her words. He then turned around and glared at her. What does that have to do with you? Whether I perform dual cultivation or not has nothing to do with you, Master. Emotienga stood up. I'm going back to cultivate. In any case, Master, help me deal with it. Chapter 142. Old Taoist Junyang. Lord Taoist Jinghe broke into Lord Taoist Junyang's cave in an imposing manner and shouted like an enemy. Come out! Lord Taoist Junyang's cave was as simple as most cultivators, but it didn't lack anything it should have. As one of the 4 or 5 late-stage nascent soul cultivators in the Celestial Pole, and the person with the highest power in Xianqing school, Lord Taoist Junyang's cave was naturally heavily guarded with numerous restrictions. If an enemy really came, he wouldn't be able to do anything. However, it was Lord Taoist Jinghe, so the guarding disciples could only helplessly let him come and go as he pleased. Lord Taoist Junyang, who was cultivating, opened his eyes and waved his hand to remove the restrictions around him, letting Lord Taoist Jinghe in. Different from Lord Taoist Jinghe's style of a fatuous ruler, Lord Taoist Junyang wore a simple sect Taoist robe and tied his hair in a bun. He looked calm and composed, looking like a real expert with a transcendent demeanor. Seeing Lord Taoist Jinghe breaking into his cave, Lord Taoist Junyang just raised his eyelids and then lowered them again. His voice was gentle and calm. What's up? What's up? You're asking me what's up? Lord Taoist Jinghe yelled. Old Taoist Junyang, are you jealous of me because I accepted a genius disciple but don't dare to say it? Not to mention Xianqing school. Perhaps only Lord Taoist Jinghe would talk to Lord Taoist Junyang like this in the entire Celestial Pole. Lord Taoist Junyang was also a genius in the past. He advanced to the nascent soul realm when he was about 200 years old, and advanced to the late stage of the nascent soul realm when he was about 600 years old. From then on, he roamed the Celestial Pole for hundreds of years, and only 3 or 4 late-stage nascent soul cultivators could rival him. The reason why he couldn't be sure was that one of the old monsters in the late stage of the nascent soul realm had been living in seclusion for a long time, and no one knew whether he was still alive or not. As for Lord Taoist Jinghe, his cultivation experience couldn't be regarded as the best in either Xianqing school or the Celestial Pole. He could only be regarded as excellent. However, only Lord Taoist Jinghe talked like this, and Lord Taoist Junyang listened. There were reasons for this. First, although Lord Taoist Jinghe's cultivation level was only in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm, he was combative by nature and had a deep understanding of fights of magical powers. He had treasures and secret techniques in his hands, so even great cultivators in the late stage of the nascent soul realm wouldn't dare to say they could win against him for sure. Second, his temperament was like this. Lord Taoist Junyang knew this very well, so why would he fight with him over this trivial matter? Therefore, even though Lord Taoist Jinghe was making a big fuss, Lord Taoist Junyang still looked indifferent and didn't even glance at him. You have your own disciple, and I have mine. Why should I be jealous of you? Not jealous. Lord Taoist Jinghe sneered. If you're not jealous, why did you let your disciple seduce my disciple? This sentence made Lord Taoist Junyang a little confused, so he raised his eyelids. Hook up. This choice of words was really inelegant, but Lord Taoist Jinghe continued to sneer. Don't tell me you don't know. You took in a disciple with a single spiritual root and treated him like a treasure. I don't believe you don't know about such a big matter as him seducing my disciple. Lord Taoist Jinghe deliberately emphasized the word big matter. He raised his eyebrows and looked at Lord Taoist Junyang from the corner of his eyes, meaning, don't try to fool me. You mean Yanfei? Lord Taoist Junyang raised his eyes. There were only a few disciples with a single spiritual root in Xianqing school, so he only needed to think for a moment to know who Lord Taoist Jinghe was talking about. You're not muddle-headed yet. Lord Taoist Jinghe ridiculed him. Soon after, he said in a seemingly sincere tone, I say, old Taoist Jinyang, my disciple is very good, but you still have to ask me whether I can seduce him or not. Otherwise, wouldn't it be very bad if we hurt our friendship? Lord Taoist Jinyang wasn't fooled by his words. He just asked, what's going on? Either speak properly or don't waste time. The only person in Xianqing school who could talk to Lord Taoist Jinghe like this was Lord Taoist Jinyang. Lord Taoist Jinghe knew this old Taoist was impatient, so he should stop while he was ahead. He immediately chose to speak nicely. I don't know what wrong medicine your disciple took, but he's been so attentive to my disciple that my disciple doesn't even dare to go out. What? You really don't know? How could I know such a trivial matter? After hearing the whole story, Lord Taoist Jinyang couldn't help but have a headache. This Jinghe was really something. Did he really have to report to his master that his disciple was attentive to a woman who was as free as him? He was already in the nascent soul realm, but he still came to question his disciple over such a trivial matter? Nevertheless, he still slowed down his voice to confirm. You mean Yanfei is pursuing your disciple? And the little disciple you just accepted, right? Yes. Lord Taoist Jinghe nodded, then put his hand on Lord Taoist Jinyang's shoulder. He once again said earnestly, Senior Martial Brother Jinyang, don't say I didn't give you face. My disciple is good, but I really can't give her to your disciple. Tell your disciple not to worry, okay? Lord Taoist Jinyang was confused. My disciple is unmarried, and your disciple isn't. Is there a problem? Is such a trivial matter worth you coming here in person? Lord Taoist Jinghe was furious. Trivial matter? I'm telling you, this isn't a trivial matter. He looked around mysteriously, then leaned close to Lord Taoist Jinyang and said in a low voice, This disciple of mine was brought back by my brat. You also know what kind of personality that brat has. It's so rare for him to bring back a girl. Right now, he's in a hurry to form his nascent soul and can't take care of this matter. If I don't take care of her for him, he'll be angry with me when he comes out of closed-door meditation. Lord Taoist Jinghe then added, You should tell your disciple not to pester my disciple anymore. It's useless even if she thinks about it. Lord Taoist Jinyang already understood what Lord Taoist Jinghe said, but Lord Taoist Jinghe complacently added, which made him unhappy. Your disciple has his own good points, but my disciple has a single spiritual root that's hard to come by in 100 years. She's young and promising, and her future is bright. Why would he pester your disciple? I think he's just bored and wants to talk to your disciple. You shouldn't think too much about young people's interactions. I'm thinking too much. Lord Taoist Jinghe shouted. If I'm really thinking too much, would that brat keep asking my disciple out? Old Taoist Jinyang, don't just protect your disciple. Although your disciple has a single spiritual root, compared to my disciple, she's just SSO. Do you want to know what my disciple's aptitude is? Hee, I won't tell you first. Lord Taoist Jinyang's face darkened when he saw Lord Taoist Jinghe blowing his own trumpet. All right, don't treat your disciple like a treasure. There are many people who want to perform dual cultivation with my disciple. Do you need to rush to please your disciple? What are you worrying about? Hey, old Taoist Jinyang, you're jealous. Jealous? I'm jealous. I have a disciple with a single spiritual root. Do I need to be jealous of you? Is such a trivial matter worth you coming here in person? Go back. Lord Taoist Jinyang was annoyed that his disciple kept being belittled. He flung his sleeve and ordered him to leave. Do you think I'll go back just because you tell me to? Lord Taoist Jinghe argued with him. I'm telling you, my disciple has the spiritual root of the origin. You know what the spiritual root of the origin is, right? She even obtained the art of the origin, and is in the middle stage of the foundation building realm, before she's 30. Can your disciple do it? She only has a single spiritual root. She's still far from being able to catch up to my disciple. Spiritual root of the origin. Lord Taoist Jinyang was fuming, but when he heard that, he paused for a moment. Your disciple has the spiritual root of the origin from the distant past era? Yes. Lord Taoist Jinghe raised his head. The next moment, Lord Taoist Jinyang sneered. So what if she has the spiritual root of the origin? It's been lost for hundreds of thousands of years. I don't know what will happen to it. My disciple has a solid single spiritual root. She can't be that bad. Old Taoist Jinyang. Lord Taoist Jinghe was waiting for Lord Taoist Jinyang to admit defeat a moment ago. But when he heard what Lord Taoist Jinghe said, he also fumed. What's the use of a single spiritual root? How many of us nascent soul cultivators have single spiritual roots? Old man Song Feng has 3 spiritual roots, but you still can't beat him. Lord Taoist Jinyang was also angry when he heard Lord Taoist Jinghe mentioning this. When did I lose to him? It's just that the winner hasn't been decided yet. Then he said sarcastically, haven't you always looked down on old man Song Feng? Why are you speaking for him now? You also have a single spiritual root. Isn't a single spiritual root good? How did you cultivate it? It's because I have a single spiritual root that I don't speak for it. What's so great about a single spiritual root? Many people with single spiritual roots can't even cultivate to the nascent soul realm. Lord Taoist Jinghe was already pestering him endlessly. Lord Taoist Jinyang was so angry that he laughed. Qin Jinghe, you're itching for a beating, aren't you? I'll fulfill your wish. As he spoke, he took out something, clasped his hands together, and threw it at Lord Taoist Jinghe. Lord Taoist Jinghe flashed, and a surge of spiritual aura blasted a stone wall into ashes. He was also burning with anger. He took out a gourd, raised it, and a wisp of real fire spurted out of the gourd. He shouted, Old man Jinyang, if I don't teach you a lesson, you'll really think I'm easy to bully. Lord Taoist Jinyang didn't speak. Instead, he withdrew his magic weapon and attacked again. Emotienga naturally didn't know that her casual words caused the 2 most powerful nascent soul cultivators in Xianqing school to fight each other, and almost razed Lord Taoist Jinyang's immortals cave to the ground. Of course, this was actually because Lord Taoist Jinghe was too good at stirring up trouble. Anything he said would make people unhappy, and it didn't have much to do with her. At that moment, she stepped into Yi Zhenji's small room with a solemn expression. 2 years had passed. Yi Zhenji had grown a lot taller, and his cultivation level had also improved. A few days ago, he finished his studies at Mengxue Hall and became an official disciple. Because the distribution of elite disciples and ordinary disciples was different, their management methods were also different. Since Yi Zhenji lived in Shangqing Palace, the steward's hall couldn't interfere too much, and it was difficult to stop other people's mouths. Thus, Lord Taoist Jinghe waved his hand and directly indicated that Yi Zhenji should be recorded as Master Taoist Shoujing's disciple. Emotienga originally didn't approve of this. Why should she record a child she taught herself as someone else's disciple? Slow cultivation. Emotienga couldn't help but laugh. You're only 12 years old, but you're already in the 3rd layer of the aura refining realm. How could it be slow? But Hualing is the same age as me, and he's already in the 5th layer of the aura refining realm. Hualing was the youngest disciple of Lord Taoist Jinghe's 2nd disciple, Master Taoist Mingzhen. Because he was the same age as Yi Zhenji, he could be considered Yi Zhenji's little playmate. Emotienga smiled. Hualing is your martial uncle Mingzhen's blood-related descendant. His spiritual roots are also better than yours, and he's been carefully taught since he was a child. How could he be the same as you? Upon hearing what she said, Yi Zhenji pursed his lips and his gaze dimmed. I know my aptitude isn't comparable to his, but if that's the case, doesn't that mean I'll never be able to catch up to him for the rest of my life? Of course not. Emotienga stroked his head. On the path of cultivation, aptitude isn't enough. You might not be able to catch up to him now, but as long as you continue to cultivate earnestly, you'll eventually catch up. Besides, in the past 2 years, you've advanced 2 layers from the 1st layer to the 3rd layer, while Hualing barely advanced to the 5th layer a few days ago. What are you afraid of? Seeing that Yi Zhenji lowered his head and didn't say anything, Emotienga knew he was still unconvinced, so she said with a smile, then let's do it this way. You'll spend 10 years cultivating earnestly. Let's see if you'll build your foundation first, or if he'll build it first. What do you think? Yi Zhenji thought about it. He still had a high chance of advancing to the foundation building realm within 10 years, so he smiled and said, But let's make this clear. You can't do things like you did today, pulling up seedlings to help them grow. Cultivation has to be done step by step. Being too impatient won't do you any good. If you're careless and end up suffering from chi deviation, you'll have to delay your cultivation for many years. The gains won't make up for the losses. Alright, I'll listen to Auntie. On the other side, Lord Taoist Jingha had just finished his fight. His luxurious golden dragon robe had already been burnt to ashes, and his face was also stained with a lot of unknown ash or soil. Even half of his beautiful short beard was burnt. He was in a sorry state. He flew back to Clear Spring Peak angrily. As he flew, he muttered, "Old Taoist Jinyang, I gave you face today. If I used the Great Yang technique, even if you didn't die, you'd still be half dead. Humph. I'll let you off for the sake of us being fellow disciples." The old Taoist Jinyang he spoke of was currently directing his disciples to tidy up the cave with a dark expression. He himself called his youngest disciple over and locked him in a relatively intact stone room before he started scolding him. "Brat, you're too bored, aren't you? Instead of cultivating diligently, you went to seduce that old fool Qin Jinghe's disciple? You could have fallen for anyone, but that old fool is a complete scoundrel. If the upper beam is crooked, the lower beam will be crooked. How good can his disciple be? If you behave yourself, I'll forget about this matter." Bai Yinfei was bewildered by his scolding. "Master, I told you about this." Lord Taoist Jinyang was stunned. "You told me? When did you tell me?" "Last time, when you were cultivating. I said I wanted to find someone to perform dual cultivation with, and you said I could do whatever I wanted." Thinking about it carefully, Lord Taoist Jinyang seemed to have said that. He couldn't help feeling embarrassed, but he still scolded him angrily. "I said you could do whatever you wanted, but you really did? There are many beautiful female cultivators with high cultivation levels in our sect. How did you fall for that old fool's disciple?" This time, he didn't even want to call him Qin Jinghe. He just directly called him old fool. Bai Yinfei felt even more wronged. "I said I'd choose from the several martial uncles, but you agreed. I looked around, and only senior martial sister Mo was suitable. But you still didn't tell me." Lord Taoist Jinyang thought for a while, then said angrily, "Doesn't your martial uncle Miaoi also have a girl? I remember she's not that old, and she's also suitable for you. Why didn't you choose her?" Bai Yinfei cautiously looked at his master and said, "That senior martial sister Wu doesn't look too." He didn't finish his sentence, but how could Lord Taoist Jinyang not understand? Lord Taoist Jinyang glared at him. "You, as a cultivator, why are you so fixated on appearances? Whether they're beautiful or ugly, they're just bones under the skin. Besides, how ugly could a cultivator be? That old fool's disciple isn't that beautiful." Seeing his furious master, Bai Yinfei cleverly shut his mouth and stopped talking. Now that his master had a falling out with martial uncle Jinghe, saying anything more would only add fuel to the fire. Lord Taoist Jinyang paced around the room twice, then said, "Let's just forget about this matter. You don't need to think about this girl anymore. That old fool was prepared to give her to his boy. It's not your turn." "Ha!" Bai Yinfei was dumbfounded. "Master, what do you mean?" "What I mean is that girl belongs to Qin Shoujing. Do you understand now?" This news shocked Bai Yinfei, but he quickly shouted, "What does it have to do with him?" I asked, and senior martial sister Mo clearly has no intention of performing dual cultivation. "That's also none of your business." Lord Taoist Jinyang looked at his disciple and sneered. "Alright, brat, be a bit smarter. I had a falling out with that old fool, but you still went to provoke his disciple. Are you trying to humiliate me? Let's just forget about this matter. If you want to perform dual cultivation, just pick someone else." Lord Taoist Jinyang swung his sleeves, then turned around and left the stone room. Although Bai Yinfei understood his master wasn't sneering at him, he still gnashed his teeth. Chapter 143. A grayish humanoid object landed on a remote hilltop on the Clear Spring Peak. It stealthily looked around, and after confirming that there was no one around, it went to the front of an immortal's cave. It clasped its palms together and cast a set of hand seals to open the outer restriction, then entered the stone door. As soon as he entered, he shouted, "Shi'er, where are you?" He walked through the stone path, entered the hall, and skillfully chose a stone door. After another set of hand seals, the stone door opened, and a handsome but gloomy face greeted him. But when this face saw him, it immediately turned into astonishment. Lord Daoist Jingha carelessly wiped his face, causing his entire face to become even darker. Qin couldn't help but frown and ask, "What did you do? Why did you make yourself like this?" Lord Daoist Jingha looked down at himself, still sitting in front of him indifferently, and pointed at his nose. "It's because of you." "Because of me?" Qin raised his eyebrows suspiciously. He absolutely didn't believe this. How could he not know what kind of moral character this master was? How many years had it been since he called his name? Every time he called him lad? Now that he suddenly called his name so warmly, he must have done something ridiculous to please him. Sure enough, Lord Daoist Jingha looked around to make sure there was no one else in his immortal's cave, then mysteriously approached him. "It's because of you that I fought with old man Jinyang." "Brat, what's with your expression?" Lord Daoist Jingha rolled up his sleeves. "I fought for you to this extent, but you're not moved at all?" Qin calmly said, "Tell me what happened first." Being dragged back to the main topic, Lord Daoist Jingha glared at him for a long time. But in the end, he couldn't help but proudly take credit. "Old man Jinyang's disciple wanted to steal your wife, so I fought with him." "My wife?" Qin asked slowly. "When did I have a wife?" "Oh, you still won't admit it?" Lord Daoist Jingha stared at him with a "you don't have to be embarrassed" expression. "Tienga, I know you don't want to tell me now, but it's okay. I won't tell anyone. I'll wait for you slowly." Before he finished speaking, he automatically stopped because Qin's face was already gloomy. "Master." "What?" Lord Daoist Jingha wanted to stroke his beard, but in the end, his hand was covered in dust. He then patted his clothes in annoyance, causing the black dust and dirt in the entire stone room to fly everywhere. Qin glared at him angrily, but he didn't know what to say. After a long time, his expression finally softened. "Master, if you have nothing to do, why don't you go out and experience the world? Now that your cultivation level is high enough, you should look for fated chances to advance to the late stage." His voice was very calm, and his words sounded as if he was thinking for the other party's sake. However, everyone could tell that a storm was brewing. Upon hearing Qin's tone, Lord Daoist Jingha involuntarily shrank back, but in the next second, he shouted boldly and confidently, "Stinky brat. What's with your attitude? I've risked my life for you. I've even lost my image, and you're talking to me like this?" Qin felt he was already very restrained, but when he heard what she said, he couldn't control the fire in his heart, and it suddenly flared up. He couldn't help but tighten his face. "Master, there should be a limit to your recklessness." Lord Daoist Jingha obviously didn't know where the limit was. Upon hearing what Qin said, he stomped his foot again. "Act recklessly? You're actually saying I act recklessly? You. If it weren't for your awkward temperament, would I have to look after your wife at such an old age? Let me tell you. Who told you she's my wife?" Qin also couldn't help but shout. "You actually took this kind of non-existent matter seriously. You've lived for 800 years, but where did your brain go?" Lord Daoist Jingha had lived for 800 years, but he was still despised by a junior. God knew where his brain went, but he only knew that his self-esteem was hurt. His expression turned fierce. "Stinky brat. Do you think I don't know what you're thinking? You've been like this since you were a child. You obviously want to die, but you're unwilling to say it. If I don't look after you for you, you can go cry in the future." Lord Daoist Jingha shouted fiercely like an elder, but Qin didn't buy it at all. "Don't take it for granted. I have nothing to do with her at all." "Humph." Lord Daoist Jingha sneered and stared at Qin with a sharp gaze. "If you have nothing to do with her, why did you hide your identity from her? Why didn't you see her for 2 years? Why did you cultivate so hard? I was the one who brought you up. Other people might not know about your twisted thoughts, but I know them all too well. You didn't tell her who you were, because you didn't want to face her as an elder. You didn't want to see her and cultivate it with all your might, because your self-esteem was hurt by her deification great ancestor. You thought you've always been taking care of her, but in the blink of an eye, you're nothing but an ant in her great ancestor's eyes. You felt like you suddenly lost the qualifications to have any thoughts about her. So you cultivated like crazy. Brat, you always thought Master was unreliable. But I have to tell you, no matter what, I've lived for 800 years. You're still too inexperienced. She didn't say anything during this long speech, but his expression was terrifyingly gloomy. He knew this master of his had always been frivolous, but what he said now made him feel as if the secrets in his heart were suddenly exposed in a defenseless situation, and exposed to the sun without any shelter. He also felt as if his softest place was ruthlessly pricked by a needle. It was a dull pain, but he couldn't find the wound. After Lord Taoist Jinghe finished speaking, he took a deep breath and continued to say, "You've always been stubborn. You keep everything in your heart, and think you can do everything well. But I have to tell you that this kind of thing is gone once you miss it, so it doesn't matter if you don't admit it now. I'll watch you, but don't say one thing and mean another. Master doesn't want you to regret it later." She didn't speak, and just glared at Lord Taoist Jinghe in front of him. But when he heard the latter's words, his gaze subconsciously softened. He looked down and his expression was stiff. No one knew what he was thinking. After a long time, his somewhat hoarse voice was heard. "Don't think you're infallible. My diligent cultivation has nothing to do with this matter." "Nothing to do with it." Lord Taoist Jinghe came over and smiled. "Brat, do you think I can't see something in your heart? There must be something you didn't tell me about the matter last time. It hurt your self-esteem, didn't it?" She didn't speak, but his expression changed and he clenched his fists. Seeing his expression, Lord Taoist Jinghe stepped back, sighed softly, and said in a soft voice that he had never used before, This matter. It's all my fault for not teaching you well. You've always had a firm Tao heart since you were a child. Aside from cultivating, you didn't think about anything else. At such a young age, you were as steady as an old man. At that time, I thought you were really born to cultivate, but now I realize that's not the case. You don't get entangled in anything because you don't care. But when you do care, it'll be a disaster. Your cultivation journey is too smooth. Don't stare at me. Although you've also experienced many dangerous situations, you've never experienced the tribulation of the state of mind. It's so smooth that you've never tasted the taste of failure. Although you've been taken care of by me since you were a child, you don't like to rely on me. All these years, your cultivation until the core formation realm can be said to be the result of your own efforts. And it actually has nothing to do with me. Because of this, you've always been confident and proud. Your pride makes you always ask yourself to do your best, and not be affected by anything or anyone. This kind of temperament has always made you walk ahead of others. But you don't know that excessive pride can cost you your life. She lowered his eyes and didn't speak. This unreliable master of his would never say such a long speech, nor would he use such a caring and soft tone. But his words were so sharp that he couldn't say anything to refute. If you go on like this, you'll have an inner demon, he said with a long sigh. She pursed his lips and said, I'll solve it. But Lord Taoist Jinghe just shook his head. I know you don't want to rely on me, but there are some things that I, an old monster who has lived for 800 years, can see more clearly than you. I don't know what's bothering you, but I know that the source of everything is that girl. So, I'm seriously reminding you that if you get her, your inner demon will naturally disappear. She's not an object. Upon hearing Qi's somewhat stubborn tone, Lord Taoist Jinghe smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile one would have when one was old and frivolous. Instead, it carried a bit of tolerance and a bit of pampering. I talked for so long, but you actually only emphasized this point. Brat, you're really done for. Qi no longer spoke. He lowered his head and didn't move. Lord Taoist Jinghe took out his handkerchief, wiped his face clean, and said slowly, In fact, this girl is really not bad. She has a rough experience, so she knows self-respect and self-improvement. Although she hasn't grown enough right now, she'll definitely become a useful person in the future after being tempered. Apart from anything else, she's indeed suitable for you. You don't like noise, so she's very quiet. You only love to cultivate, so she also has a firm Tao heart. Most importantly, you admire her very much. It's impossible for you to fall in love with a woman all of a sudden. You can only start with admiration. The more you admire, the more you care. And the more you care, the easier it is to be moved. You've always looked down on women, but you just emphasized that she's not an object. Brat, can you deny that she's very special in your heart? She still didn't answer, but it made Lord Taoist Jinghe even happier. I haven't seen you so awkward in many years. Looking at you like this, I really feel a sense of accomplishment. Upon hearing this, Shi raised his head and shouted angrily, Master! Lord Taoist Jinghe was very happy, so he ignored Shi's expression. Don't. Other people's children have teenage worries when they're in their teens or 20s, but you only have them when you're over 100 years old. How rare. Shi became even more annoyed. Although he didn't say anything, he clenched his fists as if he wanted to punch him. Of course, he wouldn't do such a disgraceful thing like beating his elder, but he didn't mind driving him out. Seeing that Shi was about to lose control of his anger, Lord Taoist Jinghe wisely stopped while he was ahead. Alright, let's not talk about that. Let's just seriously discuss the feasibility of dual cultivation. Brat, you've cultivated the pure yang technique you obtained from the deification senior to the 3rd layer, right? Right now your pure yang aura is getting stronger and stronger, and it's not much different from a pure yang body. Your art of 3 primordial cycles has obtained extreme yang aura and neutral aura, so you only lack extreme yin aura, right? Upon seeing Shi nodding hesitantly, Lord Taoist Jinghe continued to speak. Let's talk about the art of 3 primordial cycles first. This cultivation technique is closely related to the distant past era. Ancient cultivators believed that the 3 primordial auras were the origin of heaven and earth. According to what you said, this cultivation method is most suitable for advancing to the next realm. However, the requirements for cultivating it are very harsh. If the 3 elemental qis cannot be formed, then there is no hope for the great Tao. Right now, you already have the extreme yang and neutral qi, but you can't find the extreme yin qi. I don't believe that you don't know that dual cultivation with a female cultivator, with a pure yin body, is the easiest and safest way to obtain the extreme yin qi. Shi remained silent, but Lord Taoist Jinghe didn't force him to speak. He continued to say, let's talk about the pure yang art. In the past, when you accidentally obtained the yang spiritual bead, I told you that this kind of rare treasure would allow your yang energy to grow endlessly, and it might even change your physique. Now that he had obtained the pure yang secret art, this saying had come true. Now that you have a pure yang body, you will receive great benefits when you dual cultivate with a pure yin body. After that, the room fell silent. Lord Taoist Jinghe stared at Shi as if waiting for him to make a decision. Shi's expression was stiff, but he didn't say a word. After a long time, Shi finally said, I don't want to dual cultivate for some kind of benefit, whether it's for cultivation or for my inner demon. Lord Taoist Jinghe burst into laughter. He wasn't surprised by Shi's answer at all. He patted Shi's shoulder helplessly. Brat, I just said too much pride will cost you your life. You'd better. So what? If I have to rely on a woman to form my nascent soul, what's the fun in that? Lord Taoist Jinghe shook his head, but he suddenly asked, then let me ask you, if it's not for cultivation or for your inner demon, do you really not want her? This time, he didn't get an answer, so he could only borrow a place to tidy himself up, and return to Shangqing Palace refreshed. He was a wise man his whole life, so how could he let his disciples and grand-disciples see him with a dirty face? Fortunately, this brat didn't take any disciples, and was in closed-door meditation now, so there was no one around his cave. After Lord Taoist Jinghe left for a long time, a low voice came from inside the cave. At least after I form my nascent soul. Qin Shoujing. Bai Yanfei clenched his teeth, and cast a spell with all his might. The towering old tree in front of him broke, and crushed a shrub with a crashing sound. He felt a bit more comfortable, so he looked for a place to crouch down and rest. Bai Yanfei had always been very proud. He thought it was natural for him to be a bit proud. He was born in the royal family of the secular world, and was the noble crown prince of Yan country. Ever since he was a child he lived in luxury, When he was 10 years old, a master immortal came to the imperial palace. That master immortal was proficient in the art of immortals and mastered the wonderful art of wind and thunder, letting him know that immortals really existed in this world. He was very envious, so he pestered that master immortal to acknowledge him as his master. The master immortal couldn't dissuade him, so he reluctantly tested by Yanfei's spiritual root, because he was the crown prince. Unexpectedly, he discovered that Bai Yanfei had the aptitude of a single spiritual root, which was rarely seen in 100 years. The master immortal was overjoyed and reported Bai Yanfei's matter to his own cultivation group. In fact, this master immortal was only a part-time disciple of Xianqing school. His master allowed him to leave the mountain, but he just wanted to return to the secular world and enjoy the glory, splendor, and wealth. Unexpectedly, his master found a genius with a single spiritual root. Because of this, he obtained enormous benefits and was accepted as an inner disciple. He was even bestowed a foundation-building pill. Later, this master immortal's senior personally came to Yan country and took him back to Mount Taikong. He also made him acknowledge the head Grand Supreme Elder as a disciple and personally taught him. At that time, he no longer cared about the glory, splendor, and wealth of the secular world. He abandoned the crown prince position and the envious gazes of his former imperial father and brothers to become the advanced inner disciple of Xianqing School's head Grand Supreme Elder. When he was a mortal, he was the crown prince of a country. When he was a cultivator, he was the proud disciple of a late-stage nascent soul cultivator. How could he not be proud when he achieved what he did? Sure enough, with his excellent aptitude, his path of cultivation was also very smooth. Advancing to the next realm and building his foundation were extremely difficult and dangerous for others, but they were extremely easy for him. However, there were still times when he wasn't happy. For example, whenever the female cultivators in the school talked about the male disciples, they would first say Martial Uncle Shoujing or Senior Martial Brother Shoujing first. He was very unconvinced. What was so great about Qin Shoujing? Building his foundation at 20 and forming his gold core at 78? Lord Taoist Jinghe's direct disciple? Handsome? Speaking of appearance, he had seen Senior Martial Brother Shoujing's appearance, and he was just so. He thought he was handsome and charming, not losing to anyone else at all. Speaking of identity, he was Lord Taoist Junyang's last disciple. Was Qin Shoujing worse than him? Lord Taoist Junyang was also a late-stage nascent soul great cultivator. His cultivation level and identity were even higher than Lord Taoist Jinghe's. Speaking of cultivation level, wasn't it because Qin Shoujing was older than him? Speaking of aptitude, Qin Shoujing was nothing but a person with double spiritual roots, far inferior to him. In conclusion, Qin Shoujing was only born more than 100 years earlier than him. If he had more than 100 years, Qin Shoujing wouldn't even be qualified to carry his shoes for him. Of course, he was just casually thinking about these things before. Mentioning Qin Shoujing just made him unhappy. But now he was gnashing his teeth, wishing he could blast Qin Shoujing away with a spell just like that tree. In fact, it wasn't that he couldn't be with that senior martial sister Mo. He just felt that a young, promising, talented, and handsome young hero like him couldn't have a beauty as his companion. Senior martial sister Mo's identity was good. Her cultivation level was also good. Her appearance was also considered good, and she was about the same age as him. Most importantly, she had a gentle temperament. She wasn't as boring as senior martial sister Wu of Blue Phoenix Peak, or as unruly as junior martial sister Jiang of Drifting Cloud Peak. She was also capable of handling affairs, so she definitely wouldn't have a problem taking care of her husband and raising their children. But he never expected that when he finally found someone pleasing to his eyes, that guy, Qin Shoujing, would unexpectedly poke his nose in. What was Qin Shoujing? A guy who couldn't compare to him in anything. It was precisely because he was more than 100 years older than him that his cultivation level was higher than his. No, he couldn't be outdone by Qin Shoujing. It was fine if it was other people, but how could he let Qin Shoujing snatch senior martial sister Mo away from him? That would be too humiliating. Since he already harbored malicious intentions towards senior martial sister Mo, he must win her heart and let that guy, Qin Shoujing, know that he Bai Yanfei was the #1 young hero in Xianqing school. With that thought in mind, Bai Yanfei squatted on a tree stump and started laughing mischievously. Chapter 144. As a result, Emogu realized she didn't know what her master did with the matter she entrusted to Lord Taoist Jinghe. Not only did junior martial brother Bai not behave, but he even became more aggressive. When she cultivated every day, she would definitely receive a summoning talisman. The content was something along the lines of, Senior Martial Sister, today's weather is good. Let's go out and meet up. As soon as she went out, Junior Martial Brother Bai would immediately appear in front of her. In the end, even Yi Jinji was affected. He said a martial uncle Bai fawned on him so much that he ran away in fear. Emo Tiange was furious. She rushed to Lord Taoist Jinghe's main hall and shouted, Master! Lord Taoist Jinghe was so frightened by her sudden appearance that he threw away 2 grapes. When he regained his senses, he glared at her. What are you doing? Why are you making such a big fuss? Emo Tiange already knew what kind of person her master was, so she wasn't scared at all. Not only did she not shake him off, but she also complained. How did you do things? Junior Martial Brother Bai is pestering me even more tightly now. He's so annoying. Lord Taoist Jinghe was surprised. What about him? He sends me summoning talismans every day, and even runs to Jinji's side to fawn on me. He really scared Jinji. Oh. Lord Taoist Jinghe swallowed a grape and nodded thoughtfully. This brat isn't stupid after all. He actually knows how to fawn on the people around you. Master. Emo Tiange became even more annoyed at his reaction. Whose side are you speaking for? Lord Taoist Jinghe hastily corrected himself. I said he's too stupid. He actually harassed the people around you. Now that you're angry, what else is there to talk about? That's not the point, okay? Emo Tiange held her forehead. Who's the master and who's the disciple? Why do I always get half killed by this master's nonsense? Then what's the point? Lord Taoist Jinghe was baffled. The point is, how did you do things? Speaking of this, Lord Taoist Jinghe said, Girl, master fought with old man Jinyang for you. Not only are you not moved at all, but you also talk to master like this? Fought. Emo Tiange was baffled. Master, why did you fight with martial uncle Jinyang? Because that old Taoist looks down on you. Lord Taoist Jinghe said boldly, You're my disciple. Looking down on you means looking down on me. If I don't hit him, who else should I hit? Emo Tiange felt she didn't need to say anything. She should have known that if things were handed over to this master, it would definitely turn into a fight in the end. Now that the fight was over, it was no wonder that the other party did not listen to him at all. Why are you looking at me like that? Lord Taoist Jinghe, who was baptized by Emo Tiange's murderous gaze, was unhappy. Child, why don't you know how to respect your master? Emo Tiange ignored his words. She stroked her chest and swallowed her anger. She then said calmly, All right, master, you can continue eating grapes and putting on airs. I'll deal with it myself. She turned around and walked out of the main hall. Behind her, Lord Taoist Jinghe's noisy voice rang out. Child, how can you talk to your master like that? What do you mean by putting on airs? Don't go. Emo Tiange walked out of Shangqing Palace and sent a summoning talisman. The reason why she didn't want to settle it herself was because she wanted to keep a low profile and didn't want to stir up trouble. But now, it seemed that she couldn't count on anyone else. It was better for her to do it herself. Besides, so what if she offended that junior martial brother Bai? At most, she would offend that martial uncle Jinyang. In any case, her master already had a falling out with him. She didn't have to wait long outside Shangqing Palace before she heard a cheerful voice. Senior martial sister Emo. Emo Tiange took a look. This junior martial brother Bai came really fast. Junior martial brother Bai. She forced a smile. Bai Yanfei's eyes were full of spring, and his face was full of smiles. After he decided to pursue this senior martial sister Emo, he consulted several senior martial brothers with dual cultivation partners and several senior martial sisters, but they all said different things, and no one could convince the other. In the end, there was only one thing that no one objected to. A chaste woman was afraid of a pestering man. Bai Yanfei thought about it. He really didn't know how to use other methods. But this one was simple. He just needed to pester her directly. Therefore, he sent a summoning talisman every day and inquired about her whereabouts. In the end, someone suggested he start with Senior Marshal's sister Mo's little nephew. He thought Senior Marshal's sister Mo only had this one blood relative, so she must value him very much. Sure enough, Senior Marshal's sister Mo replied to his summoning talisman and was willing to meet him. Senior Marshal's sister Mo Bai Yanfei beamed with joy. I've been waiting for a long time. You're finally free. Mo Tiange looked left and right, then said with a calm expression, Junior Marshal Brother Bai, I have something to tell you. Come with me. Bai Yanfei nodded hurriedly. There were many people in the vicinity. It would be bad if others heard them. It would indeed be bad if others heard them. Although Mo Tiange was already prepared to offend people, she didn't intend to make them lose face. That would be making enemies for no reason. After circling around in the sky, Missouri Tiange finally saw a completely empty mountaintop. So she took the lead and landed. Senior Marshal's sister Mo, this is. Bai Yanfei originally thought they were going to find a beautiful place to talk about their worries. But he never expected they'd find a bare mountaintop without even a place to sit. However, his eyes shifted. There was no one here. Could it be that she wanted to? Before he could finish his thought, he heard Mo Tiange's voice. Junior Marshal Brother Bai, I think we should talk about some things. Bai Yanfei regained his composure. He rubbed his nose and obediently answered. Senior Marshal's sister, please speak. Mo Tiange glanced at him, then looked into the distance. Her voice was indifferent as she said, I understand Junior Marshal Brother's kindness, but ever since I embarked on the path of immortality, I've been wholeheartedly focused on Dao and didn't intend to get involved in matters of love, so I can only let you down. With Junior Marshal Brother's talent, presumably, your future is bright. When you succeed in your Dao, you'll naturally find a beautiful woman to marry you. Why do you need to settle for an ordinary woman like me? Junior Marshal Brother, please don't disturb me in the future. I'm not as talented as Junior Marshal Brother. If my Dao heart isn't firm, I'm afraid I won't be able to accomplish anything. After she finished speaking, Mo Tiange glanced at him again. However, when she saw Bai Yanfei's bewildered expression, she couldn't help but frown. Junior Marshal Brother Bai? Huh. Bai Yanfei was startled. Junior Marshal Brother, did you hear what I said just now? Bai Yanfei scratched his head as if he still didn't understand. I've finished speaking. I'll take my leave first. Just as she was about to turn around and slip away, Bai Yanfei suddenly shouted from behind her. Senior Marshal's sister Mo. Mo Tiange felt helpless. She stopped and turned around. Junior Marshal Brother Bai, do you have anything else to say? Bai Yanfei was dumbfounded for a moment before he said, Senior Marshal's sister, are you rejecting me? Mo Tiange naturally wouldn't say it so bluntly. She smiled and said, it's me who's not worthy of Junior Marshal Brother Bai. But I don't mind. Bai Yanfei shouted. I know Senior Marshal's sister Mo isn't a peerless beauty, and your aptitude is also average, but I think you're quite suitable, so I won't be picky. Could it be that he couldn't tell she was just being polite? But I mind. After rejecting a person she didn't like, Mo Tiange also became angry when the person said in a condescending tone, I don't mind that you're not worthy of me. Her voice turned cold. I mind very much. Bai Yanfei still didn't understand why she was angry. With an innocent expression he said, I don't mind. Why do you still mind? Mo Tiange tried to restrain herself, but in the end, she still couldn't hold back. Junior Marshal Brother Bai, even if your cultivation level is the highest in the world, and you're incomparably handsome, there will still be people who don't like you. I don't want everyone to like me. That's why I'm the one who doesn't like you. Mo Tiange interrupted him and said bluntly. Some people didn't understand even if she gave him face, so she might as well tell the truth. Huh? Such a straightforward answer made Bai Yanfei finally silent. Mo Tiange saw his face turning green and white, so she thought it was better to be tactful and not turn hostile. Junior Marshal Brother Bai, I'm wholeheartedly devoted to Dao, so I really don't want to get involved in this kind of love matter. You're very good. There's naturally a good girl who likes you, But I don't have such thoughts, so let's end this matter here. Just as she was about to turn around and leave, another voice came from behind her. Senior Marshal Sister Emo. Emotinga felt powerless. Junior Marshal Brother, is there anything else? The corners of Bai Yinfei's mouth twitched, but in the end he still said, Is it because of Qin Shoujing? You rejected me because of Qin Shoujing, right? Emotinga said expressionlessly. Who said that? Marshal Uncle Jinghe said that Qin Shoujing brought you back because he wanted to use you. Emotinga didn't say anything, but her expression had already explained her mood. You misunderstood, right? I didn't misunderstand. This was what Marshal Uncle Jinghe said. Bai Yinfei sneered. What's so good about Qin Shoujing? Which part of me is inferior to him? In terms of aptitude and identity, how can he compare to me? He was only born 100 years earlier than me. Give me another 100 years, and I'll definitely trample him under my feet. Emotinga also sneered. Junior Marshal Brother Bai, do you know where you're standing right now? Whatever you do in Morning Sun Peak is fine, but this is Clear Spring Peak. It's not a place for you to throw a tantrum like a young master. Bai Yinfei was startled by such rude words. Senior Marshal Sister Emo. Emotinga continued to sneer. On Clear Spring Peak, in front of me, you spoke ill of my Senior Marshal Brother. Junior Marshal Brother Bai, could it be that Marshal Uncle Jinyang never taught you manners? Bai Yinfei's face turned blue. Emotinga took a step forward. I said some polite words to you, but you don't understand, so I can only tell you the truth. Junior Marshal Brother Bai, do you think you're amazing? If it weren't for Marshal Uncle Jinyang, what would you be? Single spiritual root? That's right, your aptitude is very good. But if we just look at aptitude, what's the point of us cultivating? We'll just rank you according to your aptitude. Yes, Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing is more than 100 years older than you. But even if you're given 100 years, can you do the same as him? I'll say it bluntly again. Are you sure you can form your gold core by yourself in 100 years? Of course I can. Bai Yinfei's face turned red. It was unclear whether he was angry or embarrassed. I have a single spiritual root. Even if I don't have a master, I can still do it. You're actually comparing me with Qin Shoujing. It's you who wants to compare yourself with Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing. Emotinga raised the corners of her mouth and stared at him. It's fine if you don't want to compare yourself with him. But why don't you compare yourself with me? I'm not a genius with a single spiritual root, but I'm already 29 years old, and in the middle stage of the foundation building realm. What about you? Genius Junior Marshal Brother Bai. You're only a few years younger than me. Why did you just build your foundation? That's because you had a fated chance. Bai Yinfei shouted, trembling with anger. Do you think I don't know? You encountered a fated chance right after you built your foundation. So you directly advanced to the middle stage of the foundation building realm. Yes, but fated chances are also strength. Emotinga continued to smile. So what if we're comparing the aura refining realm to the foundation building realm? Junior Marshal Brother Bai, you built your foundation at 22 years old. Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing built his foundation at 20, and Senior Marshal Brother Lingxi of Sweet Dew Peak built his foundation at 17. You still couldn't beat them. Let's talk about me. I built my foundation at 23 years old. At that time, I was still a waste with 5 spiritual roots, and I was only 1 year slower than you. Did you really beat all of us? Bai Yinfei couldn't say anything. He only saw Emotinga looking at him, as if she was looking at an ignorant child. Cultivate diligently. If you only put your mind on dual cultivation, 100 years later, you'll really be unworthy of the title genius with a single spiritual root. Senior Marshal Sister Mo. Bai Yinfei once again chased after her. It was unclear whether it was because he was unwilling or because he was angry. But this time, Emotinga didn't stop. With a wave of her sleeve, a surge of spiritual aura blocked his path. So Bai Yinfei could only watch helplessly as she stepped onto the white silk handkerchief and swaggered away. Bai Yinfei stood in the same spot. His heart was filled with resentment and embarrassment. It really never crossed his mind that this Senior Marshal Sister Mo would actually look down on him. But just now, Senior Marshal Sister Mo easily blocked his path with a single move. letting him know that he really wasn't as good as her. No, of course it wasn't like that. He angrily cast a spell, blasting a big hole in the ground. He was a genius with a single spiritual root, and he was Lord Daoist Jinyang's last disciple. How could he be inferior to others? They were just lucky. The bare cliff suddenly slid open, startling Bai Yanfei back to his senses. As soon as he turned his head, he saw a person standing in front of the open stone door. That person was looking at him with an indifferent gaze. Junior Marshal Brother Bai, you came to our Clear Spring Peak as a guest. Why did you smash a hole in my immortal's cave? Bai Yanfei stared blankly at the person in front of him, unable to regain his composure for a while. But soon, when he clearly saw who it was, he jumped up in anger. Qin Shoujing, it's all because of you. I'll fight you. Bai Yanfei unreasonably took out the magic weapon his master bestowed upon him, and angrily rushed forward. It never occurred to him that he wouldn't be able to defeat Qin Shoujing with his current cultivation level. Qin Shi simply raised his hand, and a spiritual pressure immediately enveloped him. Bai Yanfei's spiritual aura stagnated, and he couldn't move even an inch. He was unwilling to accept this and desperately tried to mobilize his spiritual aura to resist, but this spiritual pressure was too strong. He spat out a mouthful of blood and fell to the ground. Qin Shi withdrew his spiritual aura and said faintly, Junior Marshal Brother Bai, don't blame me for teaching you a lesson on behalf of Marshal Uncle Jinyang. You. Bai Yanfei lay on the ground, unable to say anything. It was unclear whether it was because he was beaten or because he was angry. After thinking about it, he was overwhelmed with sorrow, so he simply burst into tears. Why was his life so bitter? He had just been rejected, and now he was being taught a lesson by his rival in love. Moreover, it was in this kind of position. He really lost all his face. Qin Shi was dumbfounded when he started crying. Although he usually didn't show his emotions, he still couldn't help but feel like he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He had only met this junior martial brother by many years ago. Although he had grown up now, his temperament was still that of a child. After crying for a long time, Bai Yanfei wiped his face and stood up while sobbing. His face was covered in tears and snot. Coupled with the blood he spat out just now, his whole face was smeared with blood. In an instant, he no longer had the demeanor of a handsome young master, and looked like a dirty cat. Just as he was about to stand up, pat his clothes, tidy his hair, and go back in a fresh and clean manner, he saw Qin Shi right after he stood up. He became angry again. Why are you still here? Qin Shi said expressionlessly, This is my immortal's cave. Of course I'm here. You. Bai Yanfei suddenly felt so ashamed and resentful that he wanted to die when he thought about how he was treated as a joke. He fiercely glared at Qin Shi. However, Qin Shi turned a blind eye to his glare. He said calmly and indifferently, Junior Marshal Brother Bai, if there's nothing else, you should hurry back to Morning Sun Peak. I won't keep you here. Who wants to stay? But Qin Shi didn't wait for him to speak. He turned around and entered his immortal's cave. The stone door was closed, and the illusory formation was opened. Bai Yanfei was left standing alone in a daze. The wind blew through his dirty cat face, making him look extremely sad. Mo Tiange angrily opened the restriction on Mingxin residents. Yi Zhenji and his little friend Hualing were playing with the inferno beast, Xiaohua, in the courtyard. When the two little guys saw her coming in with a cold expression, they immediately stood up. Auntie, Marshal Uncle. Seeing their scared expressions, Mo Tiange hastily squeezed out a smile. Oh, it's Hualing. What are you two playing? No, nothing. Yi Zhenji hurriedly said. Auntie, we're not playing with Xiaohua. We're playing with Xiaohua. This time, Mo Tiange really burst out laughing. Xiaohua was currently a spiritual beast equivalent to the early stage of the foundation building realm. It was also docile, so it became the target of these two little guys. They always wanted Xiaohua to help them with this and that, thinking she didn't know. In fact, how could she not know? It was just that they restrained themselves, so she just let them be. Besides, with Xiaohua by their side, she wasn't afraid of any accidents happening to them. Alright, you two can play. Mo Tiange stroked Yi Zhenji's head and let the two little guys play by themselves. She then went into the cultivation room. Inside the virtual sky world, there was still a cool breeze and clear water. Emotinga sat in the small room for a while, trying to calm her chaotic mood. She picked up a stack of books, but after staring at them in a daze for a while, she suddenly threw all the books out. These books made of different materials fell on the bamboo planks, making a messy sound. She panted heavily, sat down dejectedly, and buried her face in the crook of her arms. Martial Uncle Jinghe said Qin Shoujing brought you back, because he wanted to use you. Martial Uncle Jinghe said Qin Shoujing brought you back, because he wanted to use you. Bai Yanfei's words kept coming back and forth in her mind, refusing to stop. Although she was so sure and played it down at that time, she couldn't control the anger in her heart. In fact, she knew those words must have been said by Lord Taoist Jinghe. No matter what, Bai Yanfei wouldn't make things up. However, she didn't know what the original words were, or what they meant. She couldn't help but guess. Did they really have such a plan? With the virtual sky world, she wasn't afraid of other people harboring evil intentions towards her. But she didn't want that person to really harbor evil intentions. Chapter 145. Emotinga later heard that out of anger, Lord Taoist Jinyang took junior martial brother by back and grounded him. He then disappeared without a trace. Even when she went to Morning Sun Peak to run errands, she never saw junior martial brother by again. Her days also returned to normal. When she gradually integrated into the school and gained a reputation among the aura refining disciples, Lord Taoist Jinghe agreed that she no longer needed to go to Mengxue Hall every day. She only needed to go to the steward's hall to give sermons every once in a while. In addition, the affairs of Shangqing Palace were still handed over to the maids, but she was still responsible for them. If there were any mistakes, they could ask her. Just like that, Emotinga unconsciously realized that her status in Xianqing school had risen. Not to mention the low-level disciples calling her grandmaster. Even the foundation-building disciples calling her martial uncle was more sincere. As a result, she swallowed back the words she heard from Bai Yanfei some time ago. No matter what kind of thoughts they had towards her in the beginning, she saw how well Lord Taoist Jinghe treated her now. If he really treated her as a human furnace that could be used, why did he put in so much effort? If they didn't mention it, she would just pretend she never heard it. 1 year after another, time flew by. Although she had the virtual sky world, Emotinga's cultivation level didn't rise too fast. First, she deliberately slowed down the pace of her cultivation to lay a good foundation, so that her unstable mental state wouldn't affect her core formation in the future. Second, although there were many spiritual plants in the virtual sky world, they were all high-level spiritual plants. She was only in the foundation-building realm now, so she couldn't use many of them. 3 years had passed. Emotinga was now 32 years old, but she still maintained the appearance of an 18 or 19-year-old. There were many reasons for this. First, her art of Sunu, now called Sunu Art of the Origin, had the effect of retaining her youth. Second, she took a look-preserving pill, so unless she encountered some special circumstances, she wouldn't age in this life. Even without these two reasons, she was now a foundation-building cultivator. With the lifespan of 300 to 400 years, she was still young. Yi Zhenji, on the other hand, had grown up. He was now a 15-year-old teenager, but his figure grew taller. His face gradually grew longer, and even his voice became coarse. Emotinga wasn't tall, but he had already caught up to her. Presumably, it wouldn't be long before she looked up at him. Nevertheless, Yi Zhenji's attitude toward her had never changed. He still trusted and admired her, and regarded her as a respected elder. As for that master in name, he simply couldn't remember him. Yi Zhenji's cultivation level rose very quickly. Emotinga generously used all the medicinal pills and treasures she could use in the aura refining realm on him. Right now, his cultivation level was already in the 7th layer of the aura refining realm, completely catching up to Hualing. Under Emotinga's influence, this child also cultivated very hard. His temperament and perception were both excellent. In time, he would definitely have some achievements. The people of the Yi clan had been keeping in touch with him, and would send things over every once in a while. They didn't know about Emotienga's existence. They only knew that Yi Jinji was accepted as a disciple by a core formation cultivator. They were very happy, so they also sent a lot of offerings. These things were nominally given to Master Taoist Shoujing, but in fact, they were all delivered to Emotienga. Seeing those offerings, which were priceless in the secular world, Emotienga knew Yi clan members were living very well in the secular world, so she felt relieved. Although she didn't have any feelings for Yi clan, it was, after all, her clan and second uncle entrusted it to her. If it was within her ability, she ought to do her part. When the third year passed, another great piece of good news came from Xianqing School. Master Taoist Xianin successfully advanced into the nascent soul realm. He was now Lord Taoist Xianin. After learning about this, Emotienga conveyed her congratulations to Lord Taoist Xianin and changed the way she addressed him. From now on, she had to call him Martial Uncle Xianin. Luo Fengxue and the others were also her peers. Once they advanced into the nascent soul realm, they would be a great master. Although they still had the master-disciple relationship, it could be considered they had established their own school. Xianqing School had a total of 6 peaks. Each of the 5 nascent soul cultivators occupied 1 peak. Now that the 6th nascent soul cultivator had appeared, the empty peak was assigned to Lord Taoist Xianin. From then on, Lord Taoist Xianin and his disciples all moved to Sweet Dew Peak. For the sake of Lord Taoist Xuanin's advancement, Lord Taoist Jinghe specially looked for Emotienga to educate her. Lord Taoist Xuanin's aptitude was excellent. He was one of the disciples with a single spiritual root that Xianqing School would only accept once every several hundred years. However, he never fought for the title of genius. He only cultivated step by step, laying a solid foundation step by step. Now, he was already more than 400 years old when he tried to form his nascent soul, so he could succeed on his first try. This matter was just right to educate Emotienga. She obtained the art of the origin, got rid of the reputation of having a waste spiritual root, and her aptitude could also be called a genius. Lord Taoist Jinghe knew her cultivation was too fast, so he specially reminded her that no matter how good her aptitude was, she could only achieve twice the result with half the effort if she had a solid foundation. Emotienga understood his meaning. She was also aware of this problem. Building her foundation at the age of 23 was considered early, but she also directly advanced from the early stage to the middle stage. If she sold some of the spiritual plants in her virtual sky world, she could have continued taking spirit-gathering pills and reached the late stage of the foundation-building realm in 10 to 20 years. However, using medicinal pills to advance her cultivation level had a huge hidden danger. If her mental state couldn't keep up with her cultivation level, problems would arise when she made a realm breakthrough. Lord Taoist Jinghe was very pleased that she understood his meaning, but he muttered, "It'd be good if that stinky brat could also understand." Lord Taoist Xuanin's advancement into the nascent soul realm not only greatly affected Xianqing School, but it also affected the structure of the great cultivation groups in the celestial pole. The demonic beast riot not long ago was now officially over, because Xianqing School issued a mountain sealing order early. Although they lost many foundation-building disciples and several core formation cultivators, the aura refining disciples weren't affected. Many disciples with high aptitudes were also well protected. Presumably, in 50 to 60 years, Xianqing School would return to its former heyday. As for the other 6 great cultivation groups, Danding School no longer had the strength to be one of the 7 great cultivation groups. It would take at least several hundred years for them to recover their strength. Although powerful cultivation groups like Tiandao sect also managed to preserve their most important disciples, their losses were much greater than Xianqing School's because of their early underestimation. The other sect that didn't suffer much was Zhengfa School, which was located in the northernmost glacial zone. It had now been renamed Zhengfa sect. They only had one branch in Kunwu, so although they suffered losses, it didn't affect them too much. However, the conditions in the northernmost glacial zone were harsh. Although Zhengfa sect dominated the north, it couldn't develop to the scale of Tiandao sect or Xianqing School. Otherwise, they wouldn't have established a branch in Kunwu. The reason why Xianqing School always ranked below Tiandao sect was because its nascent soul cultivators were inferior to Tiandao sect. Tiandao sect had 7 nascent soul cultivators, while Xianqing School only had 5. In terms of other disciples, the difference between the two groups wasn't big. Now Lord Taoist Xianin advanced into the nascent soul realm, increasing the number of nascent soul cultivators in Xianqing School to 6. Although Lord Taoist Lingxi was likely to pass away within 100 years, Master Taoist Shoujing had successfully advanced into the late stage of the core formation realm. With his temperament, it wouldn't be a problem for him to add another nascent soul cultivator to Xianqing School within 100 years. There was also Master Taoist Lingxi, a genius with a single spiritual root. He was now in the middle stage of the core formation realm, and might advance in 100 years. At that time, the number of nascent soul cultivators in Xianqing School would increase to 7. Moreover, almost all of them would be in the prime of their lives. In addition, Lord Taoist Jinyang had just turned 1,000 years old. With his cultivation level in the late stage of the nascent soul realm, it was very possible for him to live for another 700 or 800 years. Lord Taoist Jinghe was more than 800 years old, and was now in the peak of the middle stage. As long as he had a fated chance, he could advance to the late stage. Knowledgeable people could almost imagine how prosperous Xianqing School would be in the next several hundred years. On the other hand, although Tiandao sect had 7 nascent soul cultivators, 3 of them were nearing the end of their lives, and would pass away within the next 200 or 300 years. Among the core formation cultivators, they couldn't compare to Xianqing School in terms of talent. Therefore, when Lord Taoist Xianin advanced into the nascent soul realm, Xianqing School sent invitations to many cultivation groups that were on good terms with them. The cultivation groups that received the invitations all pondered what kind of gifts they should send to befriend Xianqing School. Among them, the Grand Supreme Elders of Tiandao sect had mixed feelings. This indicated that the title of the number 1 cultivation group in the celestial pole would very likely change hands. Regardless of what other people thought, the nascent soul ceremony Xianqing School prepared for Lord Taoist Xianin was bustling with noise and excitement. Emotinga had a headache. Many guests came to Xianqing School for this nascent soul ceremony. Ordinary guests could be received by aura-refining disciples, but those guests with status and background had to be received by elite disciples like them. Because of this, Emotinga secretly cursed that senior martial brother Shoujing, who claimed to be in closed-door meditation. Why did he say that it didn't matter to him? But she had to put aside her cultivation and be busy everywhere. But in any case, this was Lord Taoist Jinghe's idea, so she had to obediently obey. Although she didn't show much respect to this master on the surface, there was a trace of respect in her heart. The reason she could have her current status and didn't make any mistakes on the path of cultivation was all thanks to this master. Fellow Taoists, welcome to Mount Taikong. I'm Mo Tiange, Lord Taoist Jinghe's disciple. I've been ordered to come and welcome you. This time, cultivators from medium-sized cultivation groups came to the mountain. Their cultivation levels weren't high nor low. Core formation cultivators were already received by their senior martial brothers and sisters with similar cultivation levels, so she received the disciples brought by these people. After all, with her identity, it wouldn't be considered rude even if she came alone. Sure enough, when these 7 or 8 foundation-building cultivators heard her identity, they all looked surprised but soon returned the greeting with envy in their eyes. One of them was very quick-witted and immediately said, I'm Wei Shirda, a disciple of Mount Bailing. Greetings to Martial Uncle Mo. Mo Tiange hurriedly smiled and said, Senior Martial Brother, you don't have to be so polite. Our cultivation levels are similar, so you can just call me Senior Martial Brother and Junior Martial Sister. How can I do that? The man smiled flatteringly. Martial Uncle is Lord Taoist Jinghe's disciple. This is too disrespectful to Lord Taoist Jinghe. Senior Martial Brother, you're too polite. Mo Tiange smiled, not showing the slightest bit of complacency. Xianqing School disciples call each other Martial Uncle, because we're afraid it'll mess up the seniority. Senior martial brother isn't a Xianqing school disciple, so you don't have to do this. My cultivation levels are similar to yours, so we can just treat each other as peers. I see. The man was about to say something when a cold humph came from the crowd. Soon after, someone said in a strange tone, Senior martial brother Wei, why are you in such a hurry to make friends with them? Why don't you take a look at your own identity? You'll make people laugh their heads off if this gets out. Wei Shirta's expression immediately changed when he heard this. He turned around and glared at one of the young men. Dong Dafeng, I won't lower myself to the same level as someone who doesn't understand manners like you. That young man sneered and said, Do you not lower yourself to the same level as me, or are you afraid of being laughed at by this junior martial sister from Xianqing school? You. Seeing that the two of them were about to fight, Emotienga hastily said, Senior martial brothers. No matter what, she was still the host, so the moment the two of them heard her calling out, they immediately stopped talking and turned around. Emotienga smiled and said, Senior martial brothers came to Xianqing school to congratulate us. So why don't you give martial uncle Xianin some face, and let this matter end here? What do you think? Since she mentioned Lord Daoist Xianin, the two of them had no choice but to stop bickering. They both cupped their hands towards her and said, Junior martial sister is right. Wei Shirta probably saw that the young man called her junior martial sister so smoothly, so he also changed the way he addressed her, not wanting the young man to take advantage of him. Emotienga heaved a sigh of relief and said, Everyone just arrived at Mount Taikong, so you must be tired. How about I arrange for everyone to rest? These people naturally didn't have any objections. Soon after, the aura refining disciples led the way while she followed behind them and helped these cultivators settle in the guest residences. Just as she finished arranging everything and was about to leave, a cultivator followed her out of the small courtyard. Emotienga walked for a while before she suddenly stopped and shouted, Who's there? With the shuttle of flying Apsara and the white silk handkerchief in her hands, she sensed something was wrong and was ready to fight. Unexpectedly, she was stunned when she turned around. The cultivator behind her was also in the early stage of the foundation building realm. He was dressed in black clothes and had a very tall stature. He was more than a head taller than her. Junior, martial brother Yi? That person said hesitantly, Are you junior martial brother Yi? In just a moment, Emotienga regained her composure and smiled. Senior martial brother Lu, long time no see. This person was Louis Dao, one of the few acquaintances she had left in Yunwu sect. Upon hearing her answer, Louis Dao revealed a smile but stopped halfway. The corners of his eyes were half moist. Junior martial brother Yi, you're alive. You're really alive. This is great. His excitement was beyond Emotienga's expectations. Ever since she left Yunwu sect, she hadn't thought about the past for a long time. At that time, it could be said that she was fleeing for her life. She simply didn't dare to bid farewell to those people. Moreover, the people she cared about at that time either had families and clans like Morong Yen, or had foreseeable futures like Louis Dao, so she didn't need to worry about anything. Now that she saw Louis Dao had become a foundation-building cultivator, and came to congratulate her on behalf of the sect, he must have been doing well. Emotienga was very happy, but she also felt calm, because it was within her expectations. After a while, Louis Dao regained his composure. Junior martial brother Yi, please don't take offense. I ran into an old friend today and forgot myself. Senior martial brother Lu is happy for me. How could I take offense? Emotienga was happy to see Louis Dao's expression, but she also felt strange. Senior martial brother Lu, how did you see me? Louis Dao smiled and said, I was arranged to live there. He pointed at the guest house not far from them. When I saw you just now, I thought my eyes must have been playing tricks on me. How could there be two people who look so similar, but their clothes are completely different? They're too similar, so I couldn't help but come here to verify it. Fortunately, I came and asked. It really was you. Chapter 146. Emotienga was both surprised and happy to meet an old friend. Although she fled Mount Yunwu in a sorry state, She was now the advanced inner disciple of a nascent soul cultivator in Enchanting School, the second largest cultivation group in the Celestial Pole. She didn't need to be afraid of Mount Yunwu's Jiang clan finding out, so she calmly admitted her identity. Sooner or later, she would personally deal with the Jiang clan. Now, through Lui Dao's mouth, she let the Jiang clan know she was still alive and well, so it wouldn't be bad to annoy them. The two of them hadn't seen each other for 12 years. After catching up for a while, Emotienga invited Lui Dao back to her residence. Lui Dao was surprised to see her living in Lord Daoist Jinghe's Immortal's cave, and hearing the gatekeeper call her martial uncle. He couldn't help but ask, "Junior martial brother Yi, why do they call you martial uncle?" Emotienga smiled, but before she could answer, a maid answered, "Martial uncle Mo is Grandmaster Jinghe's advanced inner disciple, so we naturally have to call you martial uncle." As Emotienga's status improved, and she gained a firm foothold in Enchanting School, the maids also became obedient. Not only did they not dare to make things difficult for her, but they also tried to please her. Lui Dao was shocked to hear that. When he met this junior martial brother Yi at Enchanting School, he originally thought she was just lucky enough to join Enchanting School and successfully build her foundation. He didn't expect her to have such an identity. Emotienga waved her hand to dismiss Qingqi, who came to deliver tea, then invited Lui Dao to sit down. "Senior martial brother Lu, please sit." The two of them sat in the small hall. After drinking tea for a while, Lui Dao couldn't help but ask, "Junior martial brother Yi, what happened to you all these years? Not only did you advance to the middle stage of the foundation building realm, but you were also accepted as a disciple by a nascent soul senior?" Emotienga smiled. "I was just lucky." She paused for a moment and said, "In the past, everyone thought I only had 5 spiritual roots and happened to have the same strength. It was only after I came to Enchanting School that I realized it was a special kind of spiritual roots. Later, I was accepted as a registered disciple by Lord Daoist Jinghe and became an official disciple after I built my foundation." She only talked about her experiences in a few sentences, but Lui Dao actually sighed and said, "Back then, you suddenly disappeared. Later on, Branch Master Jiang said you were a traitor who killed Jiang Chengxian. I was shocked. After that, I never heard any news about you, so I thought you actually came to Enchanting School." As he spoke, he asked again, "By the way, Junior Martial Brother Qin and Junior Martial Brother Jiang both disappeared with you. Later on, the sect kept this a secret, and I couldn't find out any news. I've always guessed that they were related to this matter. Junior martial brother Yi, is it true?" Emotienga hesitated for a moment before she nodded. "Correct. Back then, I escaped from Mount Yunwu because Jiang Chengxian behaved inappropriately towards me. Senior martial brother Jiang saved me, so he was implicated." "Junior martial brother Jiang saved you?" Lui Dao was shocked once again. It was no wonder he reacted like this. At that time, Jiang Shanghang didn't even spare them a glance, yet he actually offended his own clan for the sake of saving her. It was truly inconceivable. In addition, the fact that she actually left Mount Yunwu in such a manner also made him endlessly shocked. Upon seeing Emotienga nod, he took a moment to digest this truth, then asked, "What about junior martial brother Qin?" Emotienga was silent. After a long time, she finally said, "Senior martial brother Lu, just take it that there's no such person in this world." Lui Dao was startled. "What do you mean? There's no such person in this world?" The corners of Emotienga's lips curled into a smile. She didn't want to explain too much. "Right. Why doesn't senior martial brother Lu seem too surprised about my authenticity?" Seeing that she changed the topic so quickly, Lui Dao naturally understood she didn't want to talk about it. He was a cultivator who came from the secular world, so he naturally had the ability to read people's thoughts and body language. Thus, he didn't bring it up again and answered with a smile. "Junior martial brother Yi indeed didn't have any flaws at that time, and other people also never suspected that you were a woman disguised as a man. However, people like us who've been with you day and night would still more or less notice some abnormalities. At that time, junior martial brother Su." When Su Jingji was mentioned, Lui Dao's expression dimmed for a moment, but he immediately smiled again. Junior Marshall Brother, Sue once secretly told me why he always felt Junior Marshall Brother, he was a bit strange. Emotinga never expected the two of them would actually talk about this kind of thing in private. Even though the situation had changed, Emotinga still felt a bit curious. Oh. Louis Dao shook his head and said with a smile. Speaking of which, we both had the same feeling. It's just that we didn't think too much about it. Really? How was I strange? For example, Junior Marshall Brother, you've always been unable to grow taller. Emotinga was stunned. She couldn't help but laugh. I can't do anything about that. Louis Dao nodded. At that time, Junior Marshall Brother Qin said Junior Marshall Brother Yi was a man with a woman's appearance, so there was nothing to be surprised about. We thought about it and agreed. You really looked like a woman. Now it's really like that, so I'm not very surprised. He actually said that. Emotinga muttered to herself. No wonder he didn't look surprised at that time. It turned out he already knew about it. In fact, that was true. Nothing could be hidden from him. Upon seeing her expression, Louis Dao hesitated for a long time. In the end, he still couldn't help but ask, Junior Marshall Brother Yi, Junior Marshall Brother Qin he's very good. Emotinga smiled, but there was a hint of coldness in her smile. He's unimaginably good. He's better than you and me. These 3 words were spoken with great emphasis. The coldness in her smile disappeared in a flash, almost making Louis Dao think he was hallucinating. She immediately said, Let's not talk about this anymore. Senior Marshall Brother Liu, I've been away from Mount Yunwu for so long. Can you tell me what happened after we parted? Louis Dao swallowed the questions in his heart and nodded. Of course. He thought for a moment then said, Let's start from when Junior Marshall Brother left Mount Yunwu. At that time, my current master thought highly of me and accepted me as an inner court disciple. I also obtained a foundation building pill. After my injuries were healed, I entered closed-door meditation for half a year. I didn't expect my luck to be so good that I really built my foundation. It was only after I finished building my foundation and came out of closed-door meditation that I learned about Junior Marshall Brothers. Junior Marshall Brother Sue unexpectedly died, and the 3 of you went missing at the same time. At that time, I lived with the 4 of you, but now, I'm the only one left. Louis Dao looked lonely. He was an individual cultivator, so he valued friendships more than cultivators from cultivation groups. When that accident happened that year, he was also worried for a long time. It was precisely because of this that he was so excited to see Emotinga was still alive. The sect didn't give any explanation for Junior Marshall Brother Jiang and Junior Marshall Brother Qin's disappearance, but you, Junior Marshall Brother Yi, were labeled as a traitor. They said you were greedy for money and killed Junior Marshall Brother Jiang Chengxian. I naturally didn't believe it, but since I couldn't find you, I could only give up. Now that I know the truth, I finally understand how shameless Jiang clan is. Fortunately, they learned their lesson. At this point, Emotinga was puzzled and asked, What lesson did they learn? Louis Dao said, I don't know which expert the 2 martial uncles of Jiang clan offended, but one night, Branch Master Jiang was seriously injured. The other martial uncle was also found, and was also seriously injured. From then on, Jiang clan declined. Later on, they had no choice but to relinquish the position of branch master. Seeing Emotinga's shocked expression as well as understanding, Louis Dao couldn't help but ask, Could it be that Junior Marshall Brother Yi knows who it was? I think I know. Emotinga quickly regained her composure. Senior Marshall Brother Liu, how are you doing on Mount Yunwu now? Not bad. Louis Dao looked happy when she mentioned this matter. My master already advanced to the core formation realm, and Jiang clan no longer has the final say on Mount Yunwu. I'm doing very well. Judging from his expression, he indeed seemed to be doing very well. Emotinga also felt happy for him. The atmosphere between the 2 of them was finally filled with the joy of reuniting after a long time. Louis Dao took this opportunity to say, There's another good thing. Junior Marshall Brother Yi will definitely be very happy to hear it. Oh, Louis Dao wanted to pretend to be mysterious, but with his burly appearance, acting like that was really funny. In the end, he couldn't help but say, Zixia sect originally thought its strength would soar after it annexed Yunwu sect and Jindao school, and could become a great cultivation group. However, because of the foundation-building pills incident, the three groups suffered disastrous losses. Not long after, their nascent soul grandmaster encountered an accident in his cultivation. Now the three groups' strength is greatly damaged. Not to mention becoming a great cultivation group, they can't even control us and Jindao school anymore. So you're saying that Yunwu sect and Jindao school have actually separated from Zixia sect? More or less. Luidao nodded. Zixia sect only dared to treat our two groups like this because they have a nascent soul cultivator as their backer. Right now, their nascent soul grandmaster is as good as dead, and their elite disciples have also suffered disastrous losses. How could they have the time to deal with us? Junior Marshal Brother Yi, you're not an outsider, so there's no harm in me saying some things. We've already joined hands with Jindao school. When the time comes, we'll deal with Zixia sect together. Flames of hatred emerged in Luidao's eyes. Back then, there were only 5 people in the house. He considered himself the eldest martial brother, and took good care of everyone else. In the end, Su Jingji was killed while fighting over the foundation-building pills. Luidao was also enraged. Now that he had a chance to take revenge, he naturally agreed. Senior Marshal Brother Lu, if I can't go to East Kunwu, you have to help me, Mo Tinga said coldly. I couldn't avenge Senior Marshal Brother Su back then, but I'll avenge him sooner or later. Correct. The two of them looked at each other and smiled. Luidao couldn't help but say, Junior Marshal Brother Yi, you look very beautiful now. Why did you disguise yourself as a man back then? Mo Tinga's skin had also become thicker. In addition, the person she was praising was Luidao, whom she had always regarded as her elder brother. She didn't look embarrassed at all and just said with a smile, Back then, I didn't have a backer in Yunwu sect, and my aptitude wasn't good. I was worried that I'd be randomly arranged to perform dual cultivation, or even be taken as a concubine. Oh, so that's what happened. Luidao understood. It's no wonder you'd think that way. It's indeed very easy for a female cultivator without a backer or aptitude to be randomly arranged. It's even possible for them to be used as human furnaces. Speaking of this, Mo Tinga suddenly thought of something. Right, Senior Marshal Brother Lu, how are Senior Marshal Sister Morong and Senior Marshal Sister Wang? When she mentioned them, a trace of disappointment finally appeared on Luidao's face, but he soon smiled again. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, you don't have to worry about them. Junior Marshal Sister Morong has the full support of her clan. Although she didn't succeed in building her foundation the first time, she just built it not long ago. As for Junior Marshal Sister Wang and Junior Marshal Sister Shen, the former sect head of Zixia sect lost his power. His son had an accident, so Junior Marshal Sister Shen is already free. Although Junior Marshal Sister Wang is still married to that person, because she's always been very capable, she's now standing out in Zixia sect. This time, we cooperated with Junior Marshal Sister Wang and Junior Marshal Sister Shen. Oh, the two of them have also built their foundations. So that's what happened. This was better than she had imagined. Presumably, Wang Qianyi would also be able to leave the Sea of Suffering soon. Chapter 147. The Soul Formation Ceremony to celebrate Lord Daoist Xuannin's successful advancement to the nascent soul realm took several months to prepare. Mo Tiange was so busy that she even reduced her cultivation time to 6 hours a day. Not only her, but all the other elite disciples also did the same. The reason was that there were too many guests. Not only did the invited cultivation groups come, but even unknown cultivation groups in Eastern Kunwu, like Yunwu sect, also came to congratulate them. The more cultivation groups that came, the more conflicts there were. Some cultivation groups or cultivators that had grudges against each other met here. And it was really like when enemies saw each other, their eyes blazed with hatred. Just like when Mo Tiange received the 2 people she met that day. Quarreling was just a small matter, but there were also fights that developed. This made Xianqing school cultivators busy again. Fortunately, these people restrained themselves. They knew this was Xianqing school, so they didn't go too far. After several months of busyness, the soul formation ceremony finally began. On this day, the sky was clear and the sun was bright. More than 5,000 Xianqing school disciples and several thousand guests who came to congratulate them all gathered in the square on the main peak of Mount Taikong. Mo Tiange stood among the elite disciples and looked at the many cultivators in front of the main hall. Advancing to the nascent soul realm was a matter of great importance. In addition, there were several thousand guests watching the ceremony, so it was related to the school's reputation. All of Xianqing School's nascent soul cultivators attended the ceremony. Even Lord Taoist Jinghe wore the school's Taoist robe in a well-behaved manner. Most of the core formation cultivators also attended the ceremony. Among these cultivators, Mo Tiange saw everyone she could think of except one person. There were also nascent soul and core formation cultivators she was familiar with who came to congratulate her. This could be said to be the most spectacular gathering of high-level cultivators Mo Tiange had ever seen since she started cultivating. It wasn't until now that she truly felt how powerful Xianqing School was. This wasn't Mount Yunwu where she used to stay. It was Xianqing School, the second cultivation group in the celestial pole, and possibly the first cultivation group in the future. These nascent soul and core formation cultivators were the top group of cultivators in the celestial pole. The square with several thousand people was completely silent. Lord Taoist Jinyang was the first to stand up. His gaze slowly swept over the disciples. Every Xianqing School disciple and every low-level cultivator from other cultivation groups who came to congratulate them felt his gaze on them. Honored guests and disciples, today is our Xianqing School's Lord Taoist Xuanin's soul formation ceremony to advance to the nascent soul realm. For this reason, I would like to express my gratitude to the guests who came from afar. Some of you traveled thousands of miles to come here, so on behalf of Xianqing School, I would like to express my gratitude. Furthermore, I would like to welcome everyone once again. Lord Taoist Jinyang nodded to the people around him and cupped his hands in greeting. With his status as a late-stage nascent soul cultivator, even ordinary nascent soul cultivators and core formation cultivators wouldn't dare to accept his greeting, let alone Qi refinement and foundation establishment cultivators. They all bowed in return. I won't waste any more words. The nascent soul formation ceremony will begin now. As soon as Lord Taoist Jinyang finished speaking, celestial music started to play. Lord Taoist Xianin, who was wearing a Qianquan Taoist robe and a pair of 8 trigram shoes, passed through the crowd and slowly walked forward. Lord Taoist Xianin successfully advanced to the nascent soul realm. Although he was more than 400 years old, he could still be considered a young man. Now he looked a lot younger and looked like he was in his early 30s. He also shaved his long beard, which didn't lose his dignity, but also gave people a feeling of youth and vigor. However, Mo Tiange was still a bit surprised. She never took a good look at this martial Uncle Xuanin's appearance. Now that she saw him, he could actually be considered handsome. Sure enough, cultivators were naturally beautiful when they were young. Lord Taoist Xianin walked to the front of the stage. Under Lord Taoist Jinyang's guidance, he first paid his respects to the 3 Pure Ones patriarchs, then reported to the head Grand Supreme Elder, and accepted the title of Grand Supreme Elder conferred on him. Soon after, he paid his respects to his teacher and knelt to receive his admonishment. My disciple Xianin, you have a steady temperament, are intelligent, and are sensible. I'm very pleased that you've advanced to the nascent soul realm today. From now on, I hope you won't be arrogant or rash and achieve the great Tao. When he said that, Mo Tiange finally realized that Lord Taoist Jinghe never acted irresponsibly when it came to important matters. Now, in front of thousands of disciples, he was wearing a Qianquan Taoist robe and had a solemn expression, giving him the imposing manner of a great master. Lord Taoist Xianin knelt and kowtowed. This was also the last time he performed the formal master-disciple etiquette to Lord Taoist Jinghe. From now on, with his identity as a nascent soul cultivator, he didn't need to kneel and kowtow to anyone. Thank you for your teachings, Master. Xianyin will never forget Master's hundreds of years of teaching. Lord Taoist Jinghe showed a gratified expression. You've already stepped into the great Tao. From now on, you'll set up your own school. You don't need to call me Master. You only need to keep our master-disciple relationship in your heart. Yes, disciple will obey Master's order. Then Lord Taoist Jinyang said, Thank you, Master is done. Please rise. Lord Taoist Xianyin stood up and stood at the end of the school's nascent soul cultivators, according to Lord Taoist Jinyang's instruction, signaling the end of the ceremony. The whole process took less than an hour. At that moment, Lord Taoist Jinyang issued an order for the disciples to withdraw and the guests to take their seats. Although cultivators like them didn't need to eat mortal food, the most important part of entertaining guests was still the banquet. Thousands of jade tables were placed up and down the main peak of Xianqing School. The guests were invited to take their seats and were accompanied by Xianqing School disciples. Emotienga also received this task. She was in charge of entertaining female guests. Female guests were treated more favorably than male guests, so they were all arranged indoors. This was Emotienga's first time gathering with so many female cultivators, so she couldn't help but feel dizzy. There was no other reason. The fragrance was too strong. The female cultivators who could come to Xianqing School to congratulate them all had a certain status in the school. Each of them considered themselves as fairies. As fairies, their every movement naturally carried a strange fragrance. If it was only one, it wouldn't be a big deal. But this layer of women mixed with all kinds of fragrances. Emotienga almost fainted from the smell. In the end, she simply sealed her nose with spiritual aura and pretended she couldn't smell anything. However, this time really broadened her horizons. It turned out female cultivators in the cultivation world were like this. In the beginning, she disguised herself as a man in Yunwu sect. Later, when she came to Xianqing School, although she was with Luo Fengxue and other female cultivators, Xianqing School was a Dao school. Most of the female cultivators also dressed in Taoist robes. The few people she was close to all wore plain clothes. For such a big event, the other 6 great cultivation groups naturally all came. 3 female cultivators from Tiandao sect came, but they all wore 3 different kinds of clothes. One was dressed like a fairy floating in the air. One was dressed like a witch whose important parts were wrapped in black cloth, revealing a large part of her snow-white skin. And one was dressed like a standard sect uniform with light purple and white borders. It was said that Tiandao sect's disciples were a mix of good and bad people, and came from all kinds of backgrounds. Judging from their clothes, it was indeed true. Then came Gujian sect's disciples. Gujian sect was a sect of sword cultivators, so their disciples had to be plain. They all wore green and white clothes and carried long swords. Because of the conflict she had with Gujian sect's cultivators before, Emotienga didn't have a good impression of Gujian sect. Therefore, these female cultivators from Gujian sect were entertained by other disciples. Then came Zhengfa sect. Although Zhengfa sect's main branch wasn't in Kunwu, it was a dominant sect in the north, so its power couldn't be underestimated. Just like Xianqing School, Zhengfa sect was also a Dao school. Their female disciples also wore blue and white Taoist robes and looked plain. However, the blue color of their Taoist robes was a kind of blue-green. Xianqing School's Taoist robes were mostly white with light blue embellishments, but they wore blue-green robes with white coats on the outside. Biyun sect's female disciples had a different kind of elegance. Biyun sect was a very peculiar cultivation group. First of all, it recruited the most female disciples. Second, its disciples were all very beautiful regardless of whether they were male or female. Finally, their dual cultivation technique was very famous. Biyun sect's uniform was white clothes. When these female disciples wore them, they looked as elegant as fairies, clear and beautiful. There were also Lingsho sect's female disciples. Their uniform was yellow. Although they weren't as elegant as Biyun sect's female disciples, they were more beautiful and adorable. The hem of their clothes was embroidered with a qilin, which was said to be the mount of Lingsho sect's founding grandmaster. As for Danding School, because it was seriously injured, it only had one female disciple. She sat silently on the side, and her clothes were also ordinary. Apart from them, the female disciples of the other slightly inferior small cultivation groups all had different styles. Most of them didn't wear their sex uniform. Most of them were dressed in enchanting and beautiful clothes. Emotienga guessed that it was precisely because their cultivation groups weren't as good as the 7 great cultivation groups that they cared more about beauty. In contrast, most of the disciples of the 7 great cultivation groups wore their sex uniform. In terms of beauty and temperament, they weren't inferior at all. What satisfied Emotienga was that although her appearance wasn't bad, it wasn't too outstanding among such a large group of female cultivators, which was exactly what Emotienga wanted. As a woman, there were very few who didn't want to be beautiful, but she always knew that as a female cultivator, it was best if her appearance wasn't too bad. If she had a little bit of beauty, people would generally treat her kindly, but she also didn't pose a threat. Male cultivators wouldn't have thoughts of forcibly occupying her, and female cultivators also wouldn't feel jealous. There were too many beauties in the cultivation world. If her appearance wasn't amazing, she would most likely be classified as ugly. If she stood among a group of beauties and still looked very beautiful, she would become the target of many high-level cultivators. Therefore, it was best to be just right. At this moment, the fairies had already been invited to take their seats. These fairies naturally wouldn't talk loudly like male cultivators. Instead, the whole side hall was filled with the soft and gentle sounds of birds talking. However, the content of their conversations was a little discordant. The people in Emotienga's vicinity were all female cultivators from medium-sized cultivation groups. A haughty-looking woman cast a sidelong glance at the opposite side, then said to a fellow disciple sitting next to her, "Junior Marshal Sister, why do some people have no self-awareness? The people who came to congratulate us are all elite disciples from various cultivation groups. How could some people with ordinary aptitudes who advanced to the foundation-building realm only because they were blessed by their ancestors actually have the guts to participate in the soul formation ceremony? If word of this got out, it would really make people laugh to death." The female cultivator sitting next to her nodded obediently. The woman sitting across from her sneered and said, "Speaking of which, some people's sights are stuck on what happened 800 years ago. They think their aptitudes are a bit better, and they reincarnated into a good family, so they always feel like they're high and mighty. They don't even realize they've been overtaken and left behind, and they're still looking at things with their old eyes." The haughty-looking woman's face twisted. Obviously, she'd been spoiled since she was a child. She could mock people, but her self-restraint wasn't very good. The woman who also ridiculed her laughed, and even gave her a flirtatious look. "Senior Marshal Sister Yuan, don't you think so?" The haughty woman received her flirtatious look and angrily slammed the table. "Hiruxuan, you shameless fox." The woman called Hiruxuan was indeed a bit beautiful. More importantly, her figure was extremely charming. Although this haughty woman called Senior Marshal Sister Yuan could also be considered beautiful, she lost this aspect of her charm. Hiruxuan wasn't angry when she heard what the woman said. Instead, she deliberately giggled and said, "Senior Marshal Sister Yuan, are you still angry with me? I already told you. It's Senior Marshal Brother Zheng who likes me. I don't have that kind of intention. Why are you angry with me?" On the surface, she was explaining, but she was secretly mocking her. This Senior Marshal Sister Yuan was so angry that her whole body trembled. She said angrily, "Hiruxuan, do you really think you're something good? You're nothing but trash who sleeps in one bed, and then sleeps in another. You don't even know how many men you've slept with." This sentence greatly broadened Emotienga's horizons. As it turned out, these ethereal fairies also knew how to say this kind of vulgar quarrel between women in the secular world. They weren't any different from those male cultivators. Upon hearing what she said, Hiruxuan's expression finally changed a little. However, her anger only lasted for a moment before she quickly concealed it. She once again giggled and said, "Look at what Senior Marshal Sister Yuan said. If you want to sleep with someone, you have to sleep with someone else first. You're not like some people who strip naked and lie on someone else's bed, only to be thrown off." As a woman, it's really too shameful. Her raised eyebrows were clearly directed at that senior marshal's sister Yuan. It was obvious who she was talking about. Sure enough, senior marshal's sister Yuan's face flushed. This was obviously her secret. She never thought she'd talk about it in front of so many people, so she immediately shouted, "What nonsense are you talking about?" Whether I'm talking nonsense or not, senior marshal's sister Yuan knows very well, don't you? Hirushwan covered her mouth and smiled. She then lowered her head and drank her wine in a gentle and elegant manner. "You!" Senior marshal's sister Yuan stood up angrily and made a fighting stance. Seeing that the situation was far from good, Emotienga immediately stopped watching the show and stood up. "Senior marshal's sister, please forgive me for not being a good host. It's none of your business." Before Emotienga could finish, that senior marshal's sister Yuan angrily interrupted her. "I want to settle accounts with this shameless foxy woman." Before Emotienga could say anything, Hirushwan already cut in. "Senior marshal's sister Yuan, we're at Xianqing School. The master of this senior marshal's sister talking to you is Lord Taoist Jinghe. He's a dignified middle-stage nascent soul cultivator. Unlike Marshal Uncle Yuan, who's only in the early stage of the core formation realm." On the surface, she was talking about Emotienga, but she was secretly pointing out senior marshal's sister Yuan's identity, causing senior marshal's sister Yuan to suffer a loss in silence. However, she also pointed out that Emotienga's identity was different from the others. She wasn't a small disciple, without any background like the one she used to show off in the school. This senior marshal's sister Yuan still had a bit of rationality left. She immediately snorted angrily and sat down. A victorious smile appeared on Hirushwan's face. Emotienga saw this and smiled at that senior marshal's sister Yuan. "It's good that senior marshal's sister can understand. I apologize for not being a good host." Fortunately, this senior marshal's sister Yuan wasn't an idiot. After Hirushwan pointed out her identity, she knew she couldn't afford to offend Emotienga. Even though she still couldn't put down her pride, she still stood up and saluted Emotienga. "I was too presumptuous. Please forgive me, senior marshal's sister." Emotienga smiled and brushed this matter aside. "It's just a trivial matter. No need to take it to heart." Now that peace had been restored, Emotienga secretly gave Hirushwan a meaningful glance. She could see that this senior marshal's sister Yuan had a simple and arrogant personality. If it wasn't because of Hirushwan's provocation, she wouldn't have lost her composure like this. Fortunately, Hirushwan was a smart person. Upon seeing Emotienga's meaningful glance, she returned a smile, allowing Emotienga to heave a sigh of relief. Now that the matter on this side was over, Emotienga's sharp ears picked up another incident at the table. Two female cultivators were comparing beauty and mocking each other's attire. One of them said, "Big sister Zhen, your clothes today aren't bad. Unfortunately, they're too white. They're so white that they look like they're attending a funeral." The other one retorted sarcastically, "Little sister Wan, your clothes are also very beautiful, but they're too red. They're so red that other people would think you're holding a dual cultivation ceremony if they saw you." "Aya, big sister Zhen is too polite. Your hairpin is pretty good, but it's yellow like there's a banana stuck in it. How can it compare to little sister Wan's white jade double phoenix hairpins? From afar, it looks like there's a white radish on top of your head." Some people whose cultivation wasn't high enough burst out laughing. However, the two women glared at them angrily. "What are you laughing at? You're rude." Fortunately, the one who laughed thought this show was very amusing, so she didn't mind. She just waved her hand and buried her head in her laughter. The two women continued to flatter each other. "Big sister Zhen, when did you change your bracelet? I thought you'd wear a bracelet until you died." "That's because little sister one rarely pays attention to it. A good bracelet can naturally be matched with many clothes. It's just a matter of trying something new once in a while. Unlike little sister, one who changes her bracelet every day. Unfortunately, they're all secular goods. They can't even be considered spirit tools. Although secular goods are cheap, you have to spend a lot of effort to find them. This is the cultivation world. There are too many spirit tools, and the like here. They're crudely made and aren't much better than secular goods. The workmanship isn't exquisite, so they can't be matched with clothes at all. Ah, big sister Zhen, your clothes are made of cloud brocade, right? That's rare. Unfortunately, it seems like cloud brocade can't be made into magic tools. The quality is a bit lacking. If I didn't look carefully, I would have thought it was made of fish belly. How could it compare to little sister Wan's pearl ornaments? I don't know which year they're from, but they don't have any spiritual aura at all. They're dull and don't even have a bright color. They look like fish scales. I say, little sister, if you lack pearls, you can just come to big sister. Our family happens to have a lake that produces good pearls with spiritual aura. They can be made into spirit tools or magic tools. Mo Tiange glanced at the steamed fish on the table and lost her appetite. How could I dare to trouble big sister? Although our family isn't as big as big sister Zhen's, no matter where you go, our family has a branch. If big sister Zhen wants some new goods, you can just call us. There's no need to be polite. At this point their gazes met, sparks flying everywhere. Our family doesn't have anything. Why would we need little sister Wan to worry about us like this? Big sister Zhen hasn't changed her clothes much in a year, and they're all the same colors and styles from several years ago. Little sister naturally has to be more careful when you see them. The two of them moved closer and closer, their gazes filled with ruthlessness. The two female cultivators were both aura refining disciples, so they were also served by ordinary female disciples. That female disciple was still a little girl, so when she saw that the two of them had no one else in their eyes, she trembled and didn't dare to step forward to persuade them. Upon seeing this, Mo Tiange stood up, walked to the side of the little girl from Xianqing school, and gently put down her wine cup. Upon noticing her arrival, the two female cultivators finally stopped throwing daggers at each other and turned their gazes towards her. Upon seeing that she was a foundation-building cultivator, they promptly smiled and said, "Martial uncle." Mo Tiange raised her hand, stopping the two of them from saluting her. She then said with a smile, "Mrs., please forgive me for my poor hospitality. Allow me to offer you a toast." How could they dare to refuse a toast from a foundation-building cultivator? They immediately stood up and drank. Mo Tiange smiled and patted the shoulder of the little girl standing next to her, hinting for her to sit down. She said, "This little grand disciple of mine doesn't really know how to talk, so I hope Mrs. can forgive her and help greet others. Thank you in advance." After downing her cup, Mo Tiange gave them a final nod, then turned around and walked back. The little girl behind her said in a low voice, "Thank you, Grandmaster." Upon hearing the title Grandmaster, the two women revealed hesitant expressions. In the end, they whispered to the little girl and asked her about her identity. They no longer mocked and ridiculed each other. Mo Tiange returned to her seat and rubbed her neck tiredly. These so-called fairies weren't much different from mortal women. Getting along with them was really tiring. Chapter 148. Before Mo Tiange could finish twisting her neck, Lord Taoist Jinghe's maid Mingxia came to deliver a message. "Martial Uncle Mo, Grandmaster invites you to the main hall." Once he said that, Mo Tiange immediately had a bad premonition. Although her cheap master wouldn't make any mistakes when it came to important matters, now that the announcement was over, her master would most likely revert to his old frivolous temperament. Mo Tiange refused without thinking. "I can't let go of the matters here for the time being. Help me tell master that I'll go there when I have time." Mingxia replied with an expression that said Grandmaster was right. Grandmaster said that if he can't let go of the matters here for the time being, I'll stay here to replace Martial Uncle until he comes back. Mo Tiange was speechless. That being the case, I'll go. After leaving the side chamber where the female cultivators resided, Mo Tiange tidied up her appearance, then walked towards the main hall. Before she reached the main hall, she could already hear the loud laughter of the nascent soul ancestors. Although she didn't know what they were laughing about, Mo Tiange could still distinguish from their laughter whether it was complacency, agreement, reluctance, and so on. When Mo Tiange arrived at the entrance of the main hall, she was locked in the line of sight of the nascent soul ancestors and several nascent soul cultivators from other cultivation groups who came to congratulate her. Fortunately, her soul-refining art was already somewhat successful, so Emotienga could still maintain her composure under the spiritual aura pressure of many nascent soul cultivators. She walked steadily to the middle of the main hall and said, "Greetings to Master, greetings to seniors." Lord Taoist Jinghe was obviously very satisfied with her performance. He waved his hand and said in an unprecedentedly kind voice, "Tienga, come here, come here." Emotienga obediently walked to Lord Taoist Jinghe's side and immediately heard a woman's voice, which sounded like an oriole coming out of the valley giggling. "Brother Taoist Jinghe, this disciple of yours is only in the middle stage of the foundation building realm, but she's quite graceful in front of us nascent soul cultivators. If we Xian Su were only in the foundation building realm, we wouldn't be able to do this." Emotienga listened to the overt praise, but covert criticism, and instantly understood why her master called her over. The female cultivators in the side hall were showing off their aptitudes, luck, clothes, and spiritual weapons. In his eyes, they were no different from the women in the secular world. The nascent soul cultivators in the main hall couldn't get rid of the habits brought over by the secular world. They were all nascent soul cultivators, so they couldn't show off their aptitudes and magic tools, so they could only show off their disciples. Sure enough, they heard a bald nascent soul male cultivator say with a smile, "With Ma Xianin and Qin Shoujing supporting Brother Jinghe, Brother Jinghe can naturally accept disciples much more freely than us." Emotienga listened to the nascent soul cultivators from other cultivation groups ridiculing her one after another, but she couldn't refute any of their words. She really felt angry, so she rolled her eyes at her master in a place where no one could see her. Lord Taoist Jinghe finally felt happy when he saw his little disciple's unhappy gaze. He put on a nonchalant smile and said, "I wonder which clan's disciple dares to challenge a 5th-ranked demonic beast alone, when he's only in the early stage of the foundation building realm." The main hall was silent for a while. The female cultivator from before said, "But I heard it was your first disciple Xianin, who just advanced to the nascent soul realm, who killed that 5th-ranked demonic beast. Then tell me whose disciple can escape unscathed from under the nose of a 5th-ranked demonic beast alone, when she's only in the early stage of the foundation building realm." Once he said that, sure enough, no one said anything else. Lord Taoist Jinghe shook his head and sighed. Although my Shi'er is talented and has a high perception, his spiritual roots aren't outstanding. Accepting a disciple with good spiritual roots has always been my lifelong wish. Emotienga immediately sensed the nascent soul cultivator's spiritual senses probing her body. She stealthily peeked at them, and immediately saw several nascent soul cultivators looking doubtful, while the others didn't seem to care. Lord Taoist Jinghe sighed and said, "I myself have a single spiritual root. Although I'm in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm now, I don't think a single spiritual root can really help me communicate with the great Tao. Accepting Tienga as my disciple can actually solve the doubts in my heart. After all the cultivators with great divine power in the Middle Ages respected spiritual roots of the origin as the best. What's more gratifying is that my disciple's temperament, bearing, perception, and Tao heart are all excellent. When the time comes, she should be able to achieve the great Tao one step earlier than your beloved disciples." After he finished speaking, his smiling expression turned into a complacent laugh. Emotienga stood on the side, watching her master's undisguised complacency. She was sweating profusely in her heart. If he didn't say the last sentence, people might have mistaken him as a matchmaker. At that moment, a black-clothed male cultivator sitting near the door of the main hall said coldly, "Even if she really has excellent spiritual roots of the origin from the distant past era, I'm afraid it won't be easy for Brother Taoist Jinghe to fulfill his wish without the art of the origin." Lord Taoist Jinghe waved his sleeve disapprovingly. "Your Tiandao sect doesn't have it, but it doesn't mean our Xianqing school doesn't have it. Ever since our Xianqing school was founded, we've had countless extraordinary people. A mere art of the origin isn't a big deal, but a spiritual root of the origin that's hard to come by in several thousand years is something that can only be encountered by chance." At this point, Mo Tiange was already standing on the side with her eyes slightly lowered, pretending to be dead. She didn't feel indignant at all when her master called the art of the origin a mere art of the origin. In any case, this master of hers was very thick-skinned. The nascent soul cultivators from other cultivation groups really didn't have any reaction. However, Lord Taoist Jinyang, who fought with Lord Taoist Jinghe a few days ago, and had his face covered in dirt, snorted fiercely. However, the nascent soul cultivators from other cultivation groups sitting in the main hall all looked uneasy. Every cultivation group came to congratulate Lord Taoist Xianin of Xianqing School for advancing to the nascent soul realm. On one hand, they wanted to get along well with him in the future. On the other hand, they more or less wanted to inquire about Xianqing School's strength. But now, they actually came knocking on their door and were choked by a middle-stage foundation building disciple. Everyone's gazes towards Mo Tiange became much colder. However, with Lord Taoist Jinghe's protective and bloodthirsty temperament, he couldn't really do anything to Mo Tiange. Mo Tiange felt the temperature in the main hall drop. Soon afterward, she heard Martial Uncle Miaoi's gentle female voice, saying with a chuckle, "From the foundation building realm, to the core formation realm, to the nascent soul realm, and then to the deification realm, only then can one be considered to have truly obtained the great Tao. Even everyone present feels that the great Tao is mysterious. Tiange's path is still long." Once she said that, the atmosphere in the main hall immediately eased up a lot. Lord Taoist Jinghe had enough of being complacent. Now that Lord Taoist Miaoi had helped him smooth things over, he felt quite satisfied. Thus, he simply closed his eyes and enjoyed the maids next to him massaging his shoulders and back. Right at that moment, Mingxia slipped in from the side door. She nervously reported to Mo Tiange in a soft voice, "Martial Uncle Mo, several senior martial sisters are fighting in the side hall." Mo Tiange frowned. "They were fine when I left. What's going on?" She then raised her eyes to look at Lord Taoist Jinghe. Lord Taoist Jinghe was obviously done showing off. He raised his hand and said indifferently, "This kind of thing is bound to happen in every big banquet. You just need to handle it properly." Although the matter in the side hall was also troublesome, it was still better than standing in the main hall and becoming a target for the nascent soul cultivators. Mo Tiange hastily cupped her hands and bowed. "Master, disciple will take her leave." She then turned around and slipped out of the main hall's side door. Lord Taoist Jinghe, who just finished showing off, was obviously in a good mood, so he only smiled at Mo Tiange's obvious escape. Mo Tiange rushed all the way from the main hall. When she rushed to the side hall, she thought she would see a mess. In the end, the female cultivators in the side hall were obviously better at handling this kind of situation than she was. In the hall, 2 female cultivators from Zhengfa sect and a female cultivator from an unknown cultivation group were fighting. The battlefield of the 3 female cultivators was surrounded by other people. Before, the distance between each jade table was the same, but now, the distance between them was obviously widened. As for the other jade tables, the people sitting on them had already activated all kinds of protective measures. The 4 Xianqing School female disciples in charge of this side hall were huddled together anxiously in a corner. When they saw Mo Tiange coming in, they immediately rushed towards her. "Grandmaster Mo! Grandmaster Mo, what should we do?" Mo Tiange rubbed the space between her eyebrows. "First, tell me how they started fighting." The female disciple who received Mo Tiange's attention before hastily answered in a soft voice. At first, the 2 martial uncles from Zhengfa sect only had a small verbal conflict. In the end, one of the martial uncles from Zhengfa sect picked up some food and gave it to the other martial uncle, saying that the food was very nutritious, but the other martial uncle didn't want to accept it. The 2 of them pushed it back and forth, but due to a moment of carelessness, the food overturned and stained the martial uncle's robe. "I don't know which cultivation group that martial uncle is from. She looks delicate, but her temper is extremely fiery." Without even opening her mouth, she directly attacked and sent the martial uncle from Zhengfa sect flying with a palm strike. The female guests in this side hall were all ordinary foundation building female cultivators. And the people sitting with them were also ordinary disciples. She was the only one with the highest status, so she wasn't afraid of offending anyone. However, no matter what, Mingxiao was a nascent soul cultivator's personal maid. How could she possibly not be able to handle this kind of matter? She clearly didn't want to take the lead. However, Mo Tiange also didn't feel like investigating what Mingxiao was thinking. In any case, it was enough as long as these maids didn't dare to disrespect her. Mo Tiange looked at the battlefield. One of the two female cultivators from Zhengfa sect was in the middle stage of the foundation building realm, while the other was in the early stage of the foundation building realm. As for the other female cultivator, she couldn't tell which cultivation group she belonged to. She was already in the late stage of the foundation building realm. Although the two female cultivators from Zhengfa sect were fighting 2 against 1, their techniques were immature. On the other hand, the female cultivator from Zhengfa sect was killing with every move she made. She had actually been suppressing the two female cultivators from Zhengfa sect until they were at a disadvantage. Mo Tiange couldn't help but frown. Before she could figure out how to mediate the situation, she heard the early stage foundation building female cultivator from Zhengfa sect scream. She was already injured. Mo Tiange hastily summoned the white silk handkerchief to block the unknown female cultivator's next attack. She then shielded the two female cultivators from Zhengfa sect behind her, restrained her temper, and said with a chuckle, "Senior martial sister, I don't know which sect you're from, but your skills and Dao are obvious to all." Although the two senior martial sisters from Zhengfa sect slightly offended you, they were still injured by you. How about you give me some face and let this matter go? The female cultivator sneered coldly. Who are you? Mo Tiange's expression was indifferent. I'm Mo Tiange from Xianqing School. The female cultivator smiled again. The female cultivator smiled again. Who's your master? Mo Tiange answered with a heavy tone. I'm fortunate to be a disciple of my school's Lord Taoist Jinghe. May I know what advice senior martial sister has for me? A strange expression appeared on the female cultivator's face when she heard what Mo Tiange said. Right at that moment, a sharp whistle suddenly came from outside the hall. When the female cultivator heard it, she unexpectedly pounced on Mo Tiange while laughing loudly. Since you're old Taoist Jinghe's disciple, I might as well send you on your way. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.